positions. He liked them all, especially one that was a bit different, but she wasn't as enthusiastic, until he started to touch her in a way that felt nice. After some playful moments, there were sounds of joy, and eventually they both relaxed. He held her as she calmed down, and when he was done, she felt happy and a little overwhelmed. They cuddled and fell asleep for about an hour, waking up just in time to prepare a snack and watch the Sugar Bowl. Chris wore his Tennessee shirt and white shorts, while Joe put on one of his white t-shirts and some comfortable shorts. Chris, being a big football fan, was really impressed with the University of Tennessee, especially their quarterback and strong defense. Georgia seemed a bit unsure, which a Tennessee fan loved, but it was a little awkward for someone who admired both teams. Joe rested against him for most of the game, then curled up in his lap. He watched the interviews, including a confident statement from Sam Ellinger, and then he carried Joe to bed, laying her down gently on the clean sheets. She cuddled close to him and fell into a peaceful sleep. When she woke up alone, it felt lonely. She found Chris sitting at the kitchen bar with his laptop. He quickly got her a cup of coffee, kissed her forehead, and offered her a choice of where to sit. She chose to sit on his lap, and after sipping her coffee, she playfully chided him for leaving her alone. He hugged her and apologized, and she forgave him, snuggling closer. As he gently stroked her back and kissed her hair, he told her he had to work a bit today, which made her move around a little on his lap. After a coffee break and some more playful moments, he carried her back to bed. He introduced her to some new activities that she enjoyed a lot, which made her feel good and surprised her with how fun it was. After she expressed how much she liked it, he playfully told her that he needed to take a break for breakfast and to finish some work first. She agreed, but only if he made pancakes, eggs, and sausage to satisfy her hunger. While Chris focused on his work, Joe reflected on some tough memories that still made her feel sad and scared. She sat alone for a moment, but then her friends Lynn and Mary knocked on the door and invited her to join them for a campus tour and some shopping. Excited, she quickly went to get ready while they chatted lightly with Chris. He knew they were joking, but Lynn, with her tall red hair, and Mary, strong and dark-haired, were charming when they teased each other. It was a cool day, so Joe wore the red sweater, leather skirt, and matching boots her family gave her on Christmas Eve. Her new friends wore similar outfits and complimented her a lot on how nice she looked. As she was giving him a happy goodbye, he slipped $300 bills into her purse. He held the door open for them and watched as they walked across the parking lot before shutting it, thinking about how lovely they looked together. The taller redhead in the middle, the strong brunette on the left, and the pretty blonde on the right. He shook his head to clear his thoughts and went back to his computer. Tomorrow was the first day of work for managers and executives, and he wanted to show his boss the changes he suggested for the Carter project first thing in the morning. Chris worked through lunch and was surprised when the door opened and Joe came back in. "Hi, honey," she said cheerfully as she hurried to sit on the bar stool he often used while working. He had refilled his coffee and taken a quick break, but had mostly been busy with his tasks. He saved his work and stepped off the stool to greet her warmly. Joe gave him a quick kiss and excitedly asked if he would grill tonight because she had invited their new friends over for dinner. He happily agreed if she would help him with the vegetables and setting the table. She kissed him again, said of course, and followed him outside to the grill. He lit a charcoal fire and went to clean up and change clothes. She followed him, sharing all about her day and everything they had done. She talked while he showered, but he couldn't catch much of it until he toweled off. She was full of energy and so cheerful when she was excited. He kissed her nose and went to get dressed, while she continued to share her day. Finally, he gently asked her to change into something more casual. She returned in a denim jumpsuit with a big zipper and black boots with white fur lining. "Wow, where did you get the boots and jumpsuit?" he asked. "From my sugar daddy. He slips money in my purse when I'm not looking," she said with a playful smile. He laughed. "I'm sure he appreciates your style as much as I do. Oh, I'm sure if you like it, he likes it too." The two couples arrived right at 6, bringing wine and snacks. They sat outside on the patio in the cool evening air while the steaks, corn, and squash grilled, sipping wine and listening to the lively stories from the girls. Joe mentioned that she rarely drank alcohol, so her friends introduced her to light drinks. They all became more talkative as the evening went on. Chris, who usually preferred beer, politely sipped on a single drink while others had more. By the time dinner was served, the lively chatter filled the room, but the meal of salad, steak, and vegetables helped mellow everyone out. The rest of the evening passed with friendly and funny conversations. After the guests left around 10:30, Joe went to her old room. Chris changed into his comfortable shorts and got the bed ready, waiting for Joe to join him. She appeared at the door, playfully posing. She wore a simple black outfit with delicate white details and playfully asked Chris if he liked her new purchase. Surprised, Chris complimented her choice, jokingly saying it was money well spent, and teasingly invited her closer. Joe laughed and quickly returned to her room, changing into a nightdress decorated with cute white kittens on a navy background. Chris found her adorable, and she quickly disappeared again. This time she came back in cozy flannel pajamas, explaining they were for the cold nights in her dorm room, especially if her roommate had guests. Chris smiled, complimented the playful dragon design, and mentioned they should keep her warm. Despite the fun they were having, Chris felt a pang of sadness about sleeping alone while Joe stayed in a co-ed dorm. Joe then reappeared in her black outfit, playfully posed again, and jumped on the bed. She teased about his earlier comment. They enjoyed some playful time together, with Joe wearing her outfit for a bit longer. Eventually, they settled down for the night, ending their day with warmth and affection. She didn't like it at first, but eventually, she enjoyed using him for her own pleasure. Chris, on the other hand, loved watching her and feeling her as she rode him to a satisfying finish. He found that moment especially unforgettable. Joe woke up with a headache and an upset stomach, but after the affection she showed him earlier, he was happy to help her get through her first hangover. Joe was a fast learner in all things related to intimacy, showing great natural talent and flexibility when inspired. Luckily, Chris was good at inspiring her. He had to leave for work at 8, while Joe had appointments at 9:15 and 10:30, so he handed her the keys to the Jeep and wished her luck. She responded with a passionate kiss and asked him to return as soon as possible. Meeting with his boss to suggest major changes to the architect's plans for the Carter project was stressful, but he felt it was necessary. The current design didn't match the stadium he had seen, and it was also more expensive than the simpler, stronger, and nicer design he had in mind. Though not an architect, Chris knew that good design, engineering, technology, and construction had to work together to function well. He believed his plan was better, but his boss, Bob Elliott, was in his office drinking coffee and looking at his computer. Chris knocked on the doorframe, and Bob invited him in. After a friendly greeting, Bob poured Chris a cup of coffee and asked him to explain his ideas. Chris took a deep breath, opened his laptop, and turned it to show Bob what he wanted to change. Bob looked up and said, "Hold on a minute, Chris. Angie, can you book us a conference room and see if Trey, Sam, and Andy are available? We really need Trey, but let's get as many of the others as we can." Since it was the first day back for management, they would all be available in about 15 minutes, Angie replied. "Chris, what you're suggesting is bigger than just the two of us. We need the higher-ups involved because they are the ones who can make decisions on this project with the university." Chris nodded, knowing that was true, but it didn't stop his stomach from feeling uneasy. He thought to himself, "Why do I have to be so pushy? I should have just kept quiet and done my job. The plans were made by a university planning committee and their architects. They aren't going to change things just because a young guy thinks they look bad. But here I am getting ready to embarrass myself and possibly get in trouble with all four of my bosses. How foolish. You're just being foolish, Christian Alexander." Bob took him to the conference room so he could connect his laptop to the projector, and they grabbed another cup of coffee before anyone else arrived. "Am I making a mistake by doing this?" Chris asked his boss. Bob laughed. "Not many 25-year-olds would bring a plan to their boss that could delay the project for a few months. But you're not just any 25-year-old. Let's hear what they think before deciding how silly you are." He had an attentive audience and faced some tough questions. The COO called in another experienced engineer and asked Chris to present to him. He took a deep breath and went ahead, answered his questions, and then waited for the engineer to challenge him. Chris felt uneasy while the older man rubbed his face, stared at the ceiling, looked at the screen, and then turned to face the CEO, COO, CFO, the vice president for construction logistics, and the young guy who presented before him. Bosses, I'm embarrassed to say this, but he's right. His plan is simpler, the upper deck will be stronger, and it will fit better with the rest of the stadium. Even the luxury boxes will be better with these changes. Best of all, I bet we can do it for about 1,015% less and finish it sooner than we promised. The three executives and the VP exchanged glances and then smiled. Trey Beck spoke up. I guess there was a good reason to hire you and pay you well, young Alexander. We need to bring in more people to study and figure out your plan before we go back to the planning committee and Coach Patterson. But you've cleared a major hurdle. We didn't fire you. Chris took a deep breath and replied, I thought that might be the outcome, but I'm glad I still have my job, at least until your team reviews everything. Thank you for considering my plan. No, thank you for your boldness. It's the first time we've had a new project manager suggest changes to a $120 million project in such a confident way. Now back to business. I noticed you shook your head when Andy, our finance guy, mentioned worries about delays. Does that mean we won't have any? I can't promise that, Mr. Beck, but I think we can adjust the schedule to focus on the other parts of the project first, especially the updates to the current seating and the preparations for the new sections. Mr. Elliott would need to address that, but I'm not sure where we stand right now. Beck smiled. I think we have moved past the formalities, Chris, at least when we are here together. Maybe in a larger meeting, but you've earned the right to call us by our first names. You have shared meals and drinks with us. Andy and Jimbo Stokes, our chief engineer, are the two you haven't met yet. But that will change soon. You and Jimbo are about to become good colleagues, maybe even friends. What are the next steps, gentlemen? They each offered thoughtful responses, agreed to focus on this as much as they could, and arranged a meeting for Friday morning at 8. The men stood up and headed toward the door while Chris was disconnecting his laptop from the projector. Trey Beck leaned back in his chair casually and asked, Hey Chris, how's that friendship with your roommate going? Before Chris could respond, Trey turned to the others. Andy, you and Jimbo missed our gathering at the country club last week, and you weren't at the Christmas Eve party, so you didn't get to meet Chris's new roommate. You know, he's living in one of our apartments at Clear Fork, and he shows up at the country club with a charming companion. She impressed everyone, dancing gracefully while Chris stood nearby. He was clearly captivated, gazing at her, but he keeps insisting their relationship is just friendly. No one believed him. Sandy mentioned it to Dan, and Deborah all remember Dan Alexander, Chris's dad, right? And Deborah is his mom. Anyway, Sandy told Dan and Deborah that Chris is smitten, and they better come to meet her. So they came down, spent a week, and then went back to Nashville. 2 days later, Deborah and Sandy were talking about Chris's love life, and from what I heard, his bond with Joe didn't sound just friendly anymore. So, are you still sticking to your story, young man? That's my story, and I'm sticking to it, Chris said firmly, echoing an old song, no matter what my curious mother thinks. He's not only a skilled engineer, he's also quite the gentleman. You stick to your story and we'll act like we believe you. But let me say this. Whoever captures that young lady's heart is in for a treat. I couldn't find a flaw in her, and neither could my wife. That's rare because any man might think she's perfect, but most women might feel otherwise. Not our wives, he added, nodding toward Sam and Bob. They think she's even better than we do. Thank you, sir. I'll pass that along to her. She's officially enrolling at TCU today, and I'm sure after a long day of the usual stress, she'll appreciate a nice compliment. He added with a serious look, Of course, that's if she's not out with someone from college when I get back to the apartment and I don't get to see her. The group of men laughed loudly and all took a moment to pat him on the shoulder and praise him for catching the issues with the stadium plans. Jimbo and Andy said they wanted to meet this impressive girl soon, and then Bob and Jimbo asked him to come to Bob's office to start the real work. With his laptop under his arm, Chris headed for the door. Trey stopped him with a question. Chris, have you ever heard of architectural engineering? Chris admitted he hadn't, so Beck continued. There are some schools that offer graduate programs. As the name suggests, it's a mix of different fields that helps in planning, designing, building, and managing buildings. It combines technology, which you are good at, with environmental systems, transportation for and around the building, structural safety, and overall management. I have that information ready because we've been thinking about hiring someone with that degree to help us avoid issues like you just found and to speed up our building process. The problem is, it's hard to find someone qualified, so we've decided to support a talented employee in getting that degree. Look into it and think about it, and let me know if you're interested. If you are, you'll be at the top of the list of candidates. Chris thanked him for his support and walked away, too surprised to say anything else. Jo was sitting on the couch with her laptop on her lap when he got back to the apartment. She was clearly happy to see him and greeted him with a warm kiss. She asked about his day, but he told her it was a longer story and he needed to go to the restroom first. As he walked away, she asked what he wanted for dinner. He paused, turned to her, and said, "I want to take you out for a nice dinner. Put on something casual and let's go to the steakhouse we saw the other day. I have a lot to share with you and it feels like a celebration. How long will it take you to get ready?" She looked surprised but answered 15 minutes and hurried into her closet while Chris went into the bathroom. A big plus of being naturally beautiful is there's no need to do much extra. She slipped into a new pair of jeans and a light blue hoodie, brushed her hair, and put on some canvas shoes with blue laces before heading to the living room. 15 minutes after he asked, they were in the truck. Jo glanced at the menu prices and frowned. "Have you ever tried a filet mignon?" he asked, taking her menu. She shook her head. "Lucky you, tonight is a night for new experiences. I'll order for us if you let me know what you want to drink." She looked curious when he ordered fried mushrooms for both of them, but frowned when he said her filet should be cooked medium. "Trust me, I've served you medium steaks before and you loved them. Besides, they won't overcook a filet anyway." She seemed unsure but changed the topic. "So, what are we celebrating?" While waiting for their drinks and appetizer, he shared how he knew about plans to expand and renovate Amon G. Carter Stadium. After visiting with his family, he felt the plans weren't quite right. Since then, whenever I'm on my computer, I've been working on ideas to make the renovation better, safer, simpler, more affordable, visually appealing, and more enjoyable for the fans. He continued his story while they enjoyed the mushrooms, recalling talks with his bosses and the chief engineer as he shared his suggestions. When she asked, he repeated their supportive comments, finishing just as their main dishes arrived. Once they were served, Jo excitedly talked about the delicious taste of the filet mignon and how the salad and twice-baked potato combined to create flavors she had never tasted before. "No matter how you cook chicken, you can't bring out flavors like this," she insisted. Chris not only listened to her excitement but encouraged it. An enthusiastic Jo was even more charming than usual, and he enjoyed the moment. After they ate and got back into his truck, with Jo sitting in the middle, he briefly mentioned Trey's doubts about their just friends relationship. He left out the worst of the teasing but explained that his talkative mother was sharing anything Jo had told her, as well as what his sisters knew. She looked shocked. "What? Are you saying your bosses know about New Year's Eve?" "They and their wives know whatever you told Mom and my sisters. So whatever you said, they know. I haven't said anything to anyone because I respect you too much to share personal stories." She made a sad face. "I'm sorry. I just had to tell someone and we were planning together, so... Oops, I wasn't supposed to say that." "So the surprise wasn't really a surprise, it was planned?" he asked with a frown. "Oh, no. The plan was just to make sure you kissed me at midnight. Everything else... Yeah, that was all spontaneous. And I didn't give them many details. Mostly I just told them I had no idea how wonderful it would be and what an amazing guy you are." Chris smiled. "Well, that's good. I really don't want to think my mom is sharing all the details of your first experiences with someone else, including all the sounds that might have come with it." Jo blushed a bright red, like only blondes can, and admitted there might have been some of that. "But honey, your whole family just wants you to move on from what happened with Becky. When I told them how I feel about you, they said we are a much better match and that they could see you feel the same way. They also shared a lot about your childhood, your time at college, and your job with Beck so that I could know you better. You never mentioned leading the student government, being part of a fraternity, or many other things, so they filled me in." "And that's what all those secret meetings with giggles and laughs were about?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. She tried to look both sorry and defiant. "Okay, Maybe I said I was a virgin, and they told me how that first time can be tough. They might have mentioned how you care a lot about people you love and how to make you jealous. And maybe your mom told me, no, I won't go there, even though she shared our business with your bosses and their wives, and I feel too embarrassed to face them ever again. Anyway, maybe I shared too much, but I did it because they are my best friends and I just had to share my happiness. He put his arm around her and hugged her close, saying, "It's okay, Joe, I understand. But I hope you learn to be careful about what you share, or it might get around." She cuddled up to him, quiet for a bit, then said firmly, "I don't care who knows about us. So what? That was the best night of my life and the best experience I've had. At least until now, since you've given me so many wonderful moments since then. Everyone has a first time." Chris decided to save the talk about graduate school for another time. Instead, he asked, "Now that you've said that, tell me about your day." She tried to sound excited, but he could tell she was holding back. He waited until they got home, then asked, "So you finished with your application, secured scholarships, and got a dorm room? Why do I feel like there's something you're not telling me?" Taking a deep breath, she looked away, then back at him. "Because my scholarships don't cover all my costs. They looked like they would, but I'm about $8,000 short. And no, Christian, you are not going to pay it for me, okay? I'll find a job and take care of it." "All right, calm down. Where's the gap? Tuition, books, and fees are covered, right? Room and board? That's the issue. I didn't fully understand the total cost, and now it's too late to get more financial help. I mentioned it to Lynn and Mary, and they said they would look into it. They think I might be able to move into the dorm, join their sorority, and apply for a scholarship to stay in the house. Or you could stay here. I know you would let me, and that's my first choice. But I really want to live on campus for at least one semester to experience college life. I'll want to talk to you or see you every day and spend weekends together. But I want to be a typical student for once." "I understand. That actually sounds better. You deserve to enjoy college life. Let them handle their part and I'll take care of mine. Maybe we can find you another scholarship or grant. I don't think working is a good idea this first semester. You're a young freshman and you should focus on your studies and grades, not on making extra money." Friday was a great day. Bob, Jimbo, and Chris did a wonderful job on their presentation, and the other departments were ready for the project changes. Everything depended on the planning committee and the university administration, who would meet Monday at 9 a.m. Chris would lead the presentation, with support from Trey Beck, the head engineer, and the management team. Joe got good news via email. She was awarded a direct grant of $10,000 from Beck Construction, with the requirement that she must keep a 3.0 GPA or pay it back within 10 years. The Delta 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 sorority also invited her to join their small pledge class, which was a nice surprise. Chris wanted to take her out to celebrate, but she said that would be tomorrow night. They had plans to go out to eat and then dance at Billy Bob's, the biggest honky-tonk around. The celebration for tonight would start soon, after he assured her that the grant was real and not some money scheme. He promised to let her speak with the chair of the scholarship committee, Sandy Beck, if she needed more assurance. She smiled, jumped into his arms, and said, "Nah, that's okay. I need to start trusting you, and this seems like a good time. Now go take a shower and freshen up, just like I did, and meet me on the couch." "I heard of a fun thing that I want to try. Lynn and Mary have done it, and they say it's a way to create special memories in every room. Are you ready for some fun?" He chuckled at the sparkle in her green eyes and hurried off to get cleaned up, just like his lovely girlfriend. Before they could enjoy their coffee or have breakfast, they needed to wipe away the mess from the bar, the counter, and the table. They laughed the whole time. They had created plenty of memories in the kitchen and even ended up with wet sheets. It was a wonderful and joyful night. From then on, they would think of that when they sat at the table or had coffee at the bar. When morning came, Chris highlighted new spots they could create memories at next. They talked about 6 places in the living room: Joe's bedroom, their dressers, the closet floor, and the patio furniture. After breakfast, they worked in the living room and even stole a short nap after they had soaked Joe's bed for the first time. Then, it was time to get dressed for their outing with new friends. Eating at Joe T. Garcia's was fantastic, even on a cool evening. Their Uber driver picked them up in his spacious vehicle, which had comfortable seating. He promised to come back in 10 minutes when they were ready to leave. They paid a low fare, tipped him, and sent him on his way. "Joe, it's your turn to sit in the front on the way back. Lynn and I have already had our turns to get the discounts. You might not need to do much more than show off those lovely legs, but if you want to, you can give him a gentle pat. I did that on the way here, and I swear he seemed ready to give us a treat." Joe looked at Chris with a playful grin. "Challenge accepted, Mary. I'll see if I can get him to take us back for free and give me a tip." "Not so fast," Chris said. "You know your boyfriend might not like that. Plus, there are going to be lots of rowdy people at this dance hall who might get too curious about your cute dress." "I'm pretty confident, but just be careful not to attract too much attention." She spun around to show off her stylish red cowboy boots and the bare legs peeking out from her dress. The red buttons down her denim dress caught your eye, making you wonder what was beneath. Her red cowboy hat might have been a bit much, but the golden blonde hair flowing down around her shoulders distracted from it. He winked, someone near the entrance whistled, and another guy exclaimed in surprise. Chris said, "I warned you both!" Letting the three of them go out looking like this is not a great idea. We're still in a dark parking lot and they're getting catcalled. Lynn's bright red hair puffed out from under her black hat, and her tight denim dress that ended high above her black boots was attention-grabbing. Mary's outfit was even more revealing, a snug western shirt with buttons and a short denim skirt. This was going to be a very long night. When they showed up in their new outfits from a Thursday shopping trip, the two women had foolishly assured their husbands that men wouldn't approach married women wearing their rings. Naive Joe thought she could handle a drunken cowboy if needed. The men just rolled their eyes but promised to watch over each other. They had tickets to the Stoney LaRue concert. Neither Joe nor Chris knew much about Stoney, who was from a small town called Taft near Corpus Christi. However, their friends who loved country music insisted he was great. Since Joe and her cowboy had recently become fans, they wanted to go too. The crowd in the dance hall was mostly young and lively. They were there to have a great time. The energy of the crowd inspired Joe and Chris as they moved to their friends' reserved tables. They shouted introductions over the loud music from the opening act, but it was hard to hear, so Joe and Chris struggled to catch all the names. The chairs were set up in pairs, which meant Joe and Chris ended up sitting between two young cowboys who were without dates. They looked at Joe like hawks, eyeing their next meal, but she stayed close to her tall, strong cowboy. Chris was 6'2", and with his hat and boots appeared even taller. In his tight jeans and fitted shirt, he looked big and muscular. Joe felt small and safe next to him when she snuggled close. Everyone but Joe was drinking beer or whiskey. She was sipping on Pepsi, so people thought she had a mixed drink. Though dressed to impress, she only wanted to dance with Chris. The opening band played songs from popular artists that didn't excite Chris much. Joe bounced happily in her seat, and Chris, somewhat loudly, encouraged her to line dance with their friends if she wanted. She smiled and glanced at the cowboy next to her, who offered his hand with a grin. Excited, she joined him on the floor. The young cowboy was skilled at line dancing and liked to show off. He knew he was dancing with one of the prettiest girls in the crowded dance hall, and many eyes were on them as he enjoyed the moment. He might not get to spend the whole evening with her, but just dancing with her would help him get dances with other charming cowgirls that he wouldn't normally get. Chris liked watching her have fun. He wasn't jealous at all. He was happy she was enjoying herself after everything she had been through. Lately, he found himself wanting her to have joy in her life. He hoped she could move beyond the tough memories of her past. With love and support, he believed the next few years could be the best of her life, and her difficult history could fade away. Although their relationship had grown more affectionate, Chris still cared for her deeply and wanted to protect her. At 9:30, the opening act finished their performance. That was perfect timing for Chris, but too soon for Joe, who had danced with several partners and hadn't returned to their table much. While getting a beer, Chris also grabbed her another soda and a bottle of water. When she came back, she sat down on his lap instead of her seat. She gave him a big hug and a quick kiss, thanking him for letting her enjoy herself. He reminded her that he was her date, not her owner, and she could always have fun while with him. "I know that, silly man, but I'm yours, whether you want to accept it or not. I'll always ask your permission before I dance with anyone else." He liked her words, and the closeness felt nice. They hugged tight, enjoying each other's presence. They noticed some curious looks from others around them. Stoney LaRue, a popular red dirt country singer, was performing, and while they didn't know much about him, they recognized the song Oklahoma Breakdown. Chris usually liked this style of music, even if it wasn't quite what he preferred. There were many red dirt singers in Tennessee, and he enjoyed their tunes. Many of LaRue's fans had created line dances for songs like Oklahoma Breakdown, so Joe shone brightly on the dance floor. They both showed off their dance moves on songs like Feet Don't Touch the Ground, and Chris loved showing off their country dancing skills on tracks like Texas Moon, First One to Know, Us Time, and Down in Flames. By the time intermission arrived, everyone in the dance hall knew Joe's name and recognized her dancing. She was so focused on having fun that she didn't notice the attention, but Chris was aware of it and felt protective while still enjoying the moment. Eventually, they needed to take restroom breaks. As Chris stepped away, some of Joe's enthusiastic admirers took advantage of the chance to get closer to her. She dealt with the new arrivals quickly, but she had already danced with an older man in black jeans, a black Western shirt with embroidered roses, and a black felt hat. When he asked her for another dance, she agreed, even though Chris was away from the table. When the upbeat song ended and a slow one started, instead of taking her back, he pulled her close and began dancing closely. Joe felt surprised and annoyed, but she stayed calm and tried to keep some space between them. That didn't work. He turned suddenly, sidling up next to her and holding her there. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. "I have no idea, but if you don't move back, you'll be speaking in a high voice," she warned softly. "I know how to defend myself. I'm an oil man and one of the wealthiest men in Fort Worth. I'm looking for someone special and I've picked you." "Please don't look at me like that. Let me explain. I'm divorced, travel a lot, and I like having someone like you with me when I go out. I'm ready to offer you a great deal. I'm talking about a nice place to live, fine clothes, jewelry, and a luxury car of your choice. All you have to do is spend time with me when I'm around. A pretty girl like you deserves the best in life, and I can provide that. What do you think?" "What did you say your name was?" she asked. "I'm Roderick Barnes from Barnes Oil. Can I have a moment to think this over? It's all a bit sudden. How about you walk me back to my table so I can grab my purse? I can say goodbye to my friends and we can talk more privately." He took her back to the table, smirking at Chris. She introduced them, saying, "Chris, this is Mr. Barnes from Barnes Oil. He just made me a generous offer. I need a moment to think, but I'm leaning toward—" Barnes kept his arm around her, smiling confidently, until Joe surprised him with a swift knee. He let go, dropped to his knees, and groaned. Leaning close, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "That means I'm saying no to your offer. If you come near me again, you'll regret it." She stepped back and he muttered an insult. Joe responded with a slap that knocked his hat off. Meanwhile, Chris sat calmly, sipping his beer with a smile on his face. Then he stood up, helped the man to his feet, and led him to the men's room. Once inside, he pushed him against the wall and calmly said, "If you go near her again, you won't have the chance to cause any trouble because I'll make sure you regret it. Now, clean yourself up and leave. If I see you again tonight or anywhere else, I won't hesitate to make sure you remember this." He let the man slide down the wall, then turned and walked back to the table. He asked Joe to dance. She stepped into his arms, leaning against him, and said, "I can't believe that guy. He offered me a fancy apartment, nice clothes and jewelry, and a car in exchange for my attention. What a joke." Her voice changed from anger to playful. "I was going to say I already have someone who gives me all those things, but my guy is younger and way more fun." Then her anger returned. "Not like him. I thought about just getting rid of him then and there, and maybe I should have. Your number one guy wants to make our night memorable, maybe break a record for fun. Even if the others don't want to come, you can sit in front and show the driver the fun you planned, but only when it's safe. What do you think? Dancing with weirdos or a lot of fun? I think I'll choose the second option. Let me grab my bag and tell the others we're leaving." As it turned out, everyone else was ready to go home too, so they made the call and waited outside. They told Joe that she had been the talk of the night, especially after she stood up to that man. "What did he do to you?" asked Lynn, curious. Chris gave Joe a hug and chuckled as she retold the story in her best playful accent. She tried to keep it light, but there was definitely some hurt in her voice. Chris held her a bit tighter, and their friends understood she was feeling more than she let on. Lynn and Mary joined in the hugs, comforting her as tears filled her eyes. John called the man rude and offered his support, but Donald had a different thought. "Joe, I haven't shared much about my family. That's because my dad is a selfish person, just like Barnes. They know each other well. From Barnes's viewpoint, offering you a special status is a way to show respect, not to offend you. He believes there are many girls who would gladly accept such an offer. In fact, I know some on campus who are getting nice payments from older men. Many girls in colleges across the country are getting support from these arrangements. My dad kept his relationships hidden from us for years. We only learned about it during the divorce, but one of them became our family doctor. Now, another one is advertising for a political campaign in Texas. I'm not trying to make light of what he did or how it hurt you. You might think he saw some flaw in your character, making you willing to accept such an arrangement. But to him, he simply chose the prettiest girl around, the one everyone was talking about, and offered her a tempting opportunity, a business deal, you could say. With you by his side, he'd gain respect from his shallow friends, something he's never had. Putting on a funny southern accent, he joked, "You Joe, honey, y'all are just so pretty and classy that any man would do anything to enjoy your company." That made her laugh, and she said, "Thank you, Donald. I felt like he knew about my past and thought I would jump at the chance to be with him. I was offended. I'm still a bit bothered, but thank you for putting a nicer spin on it." She shook the others away so she could give Donald a warm hug, and Mary said, "I can still see a surprised face when you need him. You're amazing," Donald added, "and his hat flying off when you slapped him." They all laughed, feeling lighthearted like when they first arrived. The Uber driver pulled up and Lynn teased, "Remember, it's your turn to get us a ride discount." She took her job seriously, and the driver waited at the light several times. Joe had to time her signals so he would go when it was green. Her charm did earn them a free ride, but Chris gave the driver a generous tip anyway. They shared one last laugh before parting when John joked that they should Uber everywhere since it was free. They began to head to their apartments when Mary exclaimed, "Wait! I want to know what Chris told Barnes when he took him away." Chris stopped and said, "Not much, really. I just told him that if he ever came near Joe again, he'd regret it." That got a big laugh from the group and a giggle from his girlfriend. "Were you holding him in the air when you said that?" Joe asked. "Nope. I couldn't find them. They were still inside him." More laughter followed, and they walked away in opposite directions. "Honey, tonight is perfect for trying out the patio furniture," Joe said playfully. They managed to have some fun with her leaning over the railing and on the back of the love seat. After a few lights turned on in other apartments, Chris paused, grabbed a beach towel from the hot tub area, and suggested she cover her mouth with it to keep things quiet. To test out the 4 armchairs, Joe decided to mix things up. Facing away from him, she settled on his lap. It wasn't her favorite at first, but her feelings changed when he began to gently touch her. She thought the table would be simple, but he wanted to show her something different. He adjusted her position so her feet rested on his shoulders, which changed things a bit for both of them. The padded love seat was the easiest because she could sit on him and kiss him while he held her. Once she found a comfortable rhythm, she felt content and relaxed, with Chris looking similarly worn out. So they explored 3 new positions and enjoyed 7 pieces of furniture, plus a fence. It's no wonder they were tired. On Sunday morning, they both felt a little sore, but by 9 they were making coffee and breakfast, chatting about the week ahead. Chris looked at Joe thoughtfully. "What's on your mind?" she asked. "We've never talked about church. Are you part of one?" "Seriously? My mom grew up in a very religious home and she didn't like it at all. She joked about people who went to church and wouldn't let me go to Sunday school or vacation Bible school with my friends." "Why do you ask? We're Episcopalians. In Nashville, we went to St. George's pretty regularly, usually the 8:45 service, but sometimes the one at 11. Afterward, we often had breakfast or brunch as a family. I noticed Trinity Episcopal while we were driving around TCU and looked it up online. They have a folk mass at noon that I'd like to try, if you'll come with me. It's less formal, with lots of singing. They use guitars, keyboards, and other instruments instead of an organ, and the songs are different from the hymnal. They are praise songs or folk hymns. After the service, we could grab a bite to eat. What do you think?" Her eyes widened, but she seemed interested. She asked about what to wear, what the service would be like, and other details he didn't know, but she looked more eager than worried. She decided on a black sweater dress with red buttons and black boots, which was stylish yet quite modest. As soon as they got out of the truck and walked to their seats, people watched them closely. But that was nothing compared to the attention Jo got when she started to sing. Her voice was beautiful, almost like an angel's. She was completely engaged, listening to every word, paying attention during every pause, and even kneeling and joining in when asked. Chris chose not to take communion with her, explaining that First Communion was an important step, similar to the baptism they had just witnessed. Jo nodded and watched others take communion, but told him it was okay if he wanted to participate. He wrapped his arm around her, giving her a comforting hug. Jo looked at him with shining eyes before turning back to focus on the service. It took a long time to leave because so many people wanted to meet them. The choir director and Father Joseph, the priest, took turns inviting Jo to join the choir. Chris jokingly asked, "What about me? Do you want me in the choir too?" "Of course," said the director with a friendly smile. "We have a few spots for bass baritones like you, and I'd be happy to help you sing better." Jo laughed, and Father Joseph smiled back, while Chris felt that she was right. Jo, with bright eyes, added, "Jo really doesn't need any training. Her voice is clear and can reach many notes. She would quickly become the star of the choir." They decided to discuss it once Jo got a better understanding of what TCU expected from her. Chris looked down at Jo and said, "Given how much she enjoyed the church experience today, I'm sure we'll be back soon." "First time? Really? Let me get something for you." Father Joseph hurried away, and his wife took his place to tell Jo how much she liked her singing. A few minutes later, Father Joseph returned with some brochures and a book about Christianity and the American Episcopal Church. Jo accepted them with joy, thanked him, and promised to reach out if she had questions. During brunch, Jo excitedly shared details about her first church experience. She explained that she turned down the choir invitation because she was nervous about singing solos. Chris smiled at her often and supported her whenever she felt unsure about her upbringing in a church. When Jo mentioned the choir again, he assured her that the reason they wanted her was because her voice truly was angelic, just as everyone had said at church, and as he told her when they first met, and how their friends praised her after their duet. She agreed to think about it and reflected on the baptism of a baby that she had seen during the service. She then wondered aloud if she had ever been baptized and frowned. "If I haven't been baptized, can I still be? Is there an age limit?" She had many questions that afternoon. While Chris was helpful, he suggested she call Father Joe after reading the materials to ask her questions of a true expert. She thought this was a good idea, and Chris wondered if he had ever been as curious as Joe. Growing up in the church, he had been to Sunday school for as long as he could remember and had attended many services, mostly the formal ones. They had become routine for him. Having Joe around showed him just how automatic his church visits had become. After reading the materials, Joe got on her laptop to learn more about the Episcopal Church and Christianity. Chris took the hint and focused on planning for their project. "I'm hungry and need to work out. Which one will my boyfriend help me with first?" she said playfully, batting her eyes at him. They decided to work out first, and after 40 minutes, they were very hungry and needed a shower. This added another 20 minutes to their time, and by then they were starving. Fortunately, the freezer was full of tasty frozen meals. They each had 2 meals, 1 salmon with vegetables and 1 shrimp pasta. With only utensils and glasses to clean, Joe wanted to watch a movie. "Have you ever seen a movie with Rob Lowe and Demi Moore called About Last Night?" Chris asked. She hadn't seen it, so he found it and explained it was based on a book and set in the 1980s. "You really are old," she teased. "The 1980s? So if we watch Spartacus, does that make me a Roman?" he replied playfully. She laughed at the funny parts and admired Rob Lowe's looks. She felt upset for the character Demi, who had an unkind boss. She even wondered if she sounded as lovely as Demi. When Rob and Demi shared sweet moments, she got excited and cried when Demi moved back to her apartment. She was even sadder when Rob confessed his feelings and Demi turned him down while it rained. The fun moments, like riding bikes and watching Demi and Rob together, made her happy, so they playfully pretended to recreate the sweet bathtub scene, adjusted for Chris's size. Then she insisted they dry off and cuddle in bed. It was one of the best Sundays in Chris's life and easily Joe's favorite too. On Monday, they met at 9 with the Stadium Planning Committee, the administration, and Coach Patterson. After introductions, Chris started his presentation by explaining that his proposal came to him while he was in the stadium with a student and some football fans, including himself. He already knew the initial plans, and standing in the stadium, he felt they didn't fit well with the historic setting and wouldn't be as welcoming for fans as they could be. Chris noticed Coach Patterson becoming more engaged during the presentation and saw the others looking at him for his reaction. As the presentation continued, Coach P and the others became more interested and active. In the end, Chris and the people from Beck answered many questions, and the committee decided to pause the meeting for a private discussion with their architects. After 30 minutes, they brought the Beck representatives back and agreed to the changes, but with one condition, that everything would be done in time for the 2020 season. Trey Beck assured them it would, and everyone shook hands. Coach P held onto Chris's hand for an extended shake and expressed how pleased he was that Chris visited the stadium and got inspired for the updates. He promised Chris would have great seats for every game from that point on. The construction teams were getting back to work, so Chris went to the office early to meet with Bob Elliott and Jimbo before heading to the TCU campus. Chris's updated plans were quickly accepted, and they took their work trucks to the TCU football stadium, then walked to the meeting. After the meeting, Bob introduced Chris to all the workers, and he and Jimbo discussed the changes to the original plans. There were some unhappy faces, so Chris spent 35 minutes explaining the updates, why they were necessary, and answering questions. This helped, and everyone got together to plan their tasks for the day and the week ahead. Chris spent the day getting to know his new coworkers, asking for their feedback, constructive criticism, and new ideas. He also asked them to share suggestions for making their jobs safer and easier. By the time he left the site at 5:30, he felt both tired and excited. Joe had taken the Jeep to meet her advisor. She got approval for her AP English credit and was able to adjust her schedule for spring by adding a Spanish class. After that, she had lunch with Lynn, who told Joe that she and Mary had already planned her afternoon. After lunch, they met Mary at the Tri Delta house and spent an hour talking with the alumni president, chapter president, and rush captain. They encouraged Joe to consider their sorority and talked about the benefits of being a member in college, in jobs, and in life. They also mentioned a scholarship to help with the fees for joining and being part of the group. They even offered free housing, but Joe was happy with the dorm room she received, and with the Beck scholarship, that didn't influence her decision. She wasn't sure if she wanted to spend time in a sorority anyway. After all, she had a nice apartment and a great boyfriend, and she planned to enjoy her free time with him. Lynn and Mary convinced her to go on a quick shoe shopping trip. She got back to her apartment at 5:40, parked her car, and carried her bag of shoes to the front door while thinking about what to cook for dinner that would make her boyfriend happy. As moving to the dorm got closer, she found herself wanting his affection more. Joe unlocked the door and stepped inside. She pushed the door shut with her foot, but it quickly flew back open and hit the wall. Before she could turn to see who had come in, she was pushed across the room and fell to the floor. 4 men rushed toward her, and before she could react, they held her down. 2 of the men pinned her arms while another sat on her legs. She screamed, but someone covered her face with a cloth, and she soon lost consciousness. When Joe woke up, her arms were tied behind her and her legs were secured. Something was stuffed in her mouth, keeping her from shouting. As her vision cleared, she saw her past family around her, her former guardian, his 3 sons, and her mother all smiling. "We thought you could just disappear, huh? You owe us," one of them sneered. "We're taking you back so you can repay your debt." Joe glared at her mother, making her shrink back. Her mother called to Clyde, asking him to make Joe stop looking at her. Clyde stepped closer. "If you keep it up, this is going to hurt more," he warned. "You're going to pay for leaving. The more you fight, the worse it will be." Joe didn't back down, and Clyde slapped her again, causing her head to turn. One of his sons chimed in, warning Clyde not to hurt her too much, as they had promised others something special. Clyde stepped back, shaking his fist at her. "Keep challenging me, and it'll be even worse for you." Joe looked him in the eye defiantly, and suddenly, Clyde stumbled back, breath knocked out of him as he was pushed into one of his sons. The son closest to his father on the left fell when a large hand struck him hard, knocking him down as he watched his dad get thrown across the room. The one on the right turned to face Chris, fists raised like a boxer, but collapsed in pain when a strong kick hit his knee. Chris advanced toward the man and the remaining son, his face full of anger. He began to threaten them. "Your friends won't even know who you are when I'm done with you. You broke into my home and hurt my girlfriend, and I could defend myself. But instead, I'm going to make sure you regret ever stepping foot here." One of the sons pushed his father aside and charged at Chris, but Chris stepped out of the way, grabbed him by his shirt, and sent him crashing head-first into the door. He went down and stayed still. Chris heard Joe scream, and he quickly turned around, swinging his fist. It connected with the face of a woman who was trying to stab him, sending her to the ground. The knife she held fell beside her, and Chris recognized it from his own kitchen. Just then, Chris noticed the father charging at him with a long knife. He dodged to the side, and as the man passed, Chris hit him hard in the face. The man staggered but turned back, threatening Chris. "I'm going to cut you up and take her with me." The man swung the knife back and forth, but Chris moved calmly, staying out of reach. When the man lunged at him again, Chris caught his wrist and used the momentum to twist his arm behind him. The father cried out in pain, and Chris warned him, holding the knife at his back. "You're done. You brought this on yourself." Chris held the man tightly as the knife was slowly forced toward his stomach. "Now you're going to face the consequences," he said coldly. The man struggled to let go of the knife, but Chris had a firm grip on both his wrist and hand. He pushed the blade forward until it barely touched the man's belly. The man panicked, crying out and begging for his life, but Chris remained calm. "You're not so tough now, are you?" Chris remarked. "You're scared now that you're up against someone who can fight back." As the man continued to plead, Chris loosened his hold just enough to let him fall to the floor, unconscious from the fear and the impact. Chris made sure the knife was still in the man's hand, but kept it from causing further harm. After checking to ensure the others were no longer a threat, Chris hurried to Joe. He gently removed the cloth from her mouth and recorded the scene on his phone for evidence. Though bruised, Joe gave him a small smile. "I guess I might not have been able to take you down after all. You did well." Chris leaned in to kiss her softly, whispering how strong she was. "I hear the police coming. I'm going to step away so they can see what happened and you'll be safe." He then moved a few steps back, ensuring Joe was okay, and called the company's attorney to report the incident. He quickly told attorney Thomas Behrens what happened, gave him the apartment address, and was assured that a defense lawyer from the firm would be there in 5 minutes or less. Chris stood still with his hands at his sides until local police officers rushed in with guns drawn. He raised his hands, palms out, to show he had no weapons. 2 more officers entered the room, and they spread out while the first 2 searched Chris and placed handcuffs on him. When one of the officers saw Joe and her mother, he called for female officers to come and said they needed multiple EMTs right away. Officer Rodriguez said, "Washington, take him into the other room and get his side of the story. I'll talk to the women and I'll have Johnson speak with the man over here who is on the floor, upset and holding his knee. Then we can discuss what to do next." Chris started his story by saying he had walked up from the parking lot. "I found the door open and heard a loud sound before I went in. As I quietly stepped inside, I heard a man saying terrible things to my roommate who was tied up in the chair you found her in. He mentioned taking her back home and that she would be with some important men he had promised her to. I stepped in, but nobody noticed me because they were all around Joe's chair. The man in the middle hit her again, then stepped back and said he would hit her in the stomach. There were 4 big men and a woman in my apartment, all threatening my roommate. I wasn't sure if they had weapons, but I soon realized they did. They had knives. The one who hit Joe seemed to be the leader, so I kicked him in the back and pushed him across the room. I hit the guy to my left and then kicked the man on my right in the knee. The 3rd man rushed at me, and I grabbed his shirt and pushed him into the front door. I sensed someone behind me, so I turned and swung my right fist. The woman was about to stab me with a kitchen knife, but I hit her first and she fell down. Then a man who I later learned was related to the others came at me with a knife. I caught his wrist and we struggled for it. He got cut a few times, but I managed to keep the knife away from me so I wouldn't get hurt. He got tired pretty quickly, so I let go of his wrist with my left hand and hit him in the face. Washington let Chris finish his story without interruption, asked a few questions for clarity, and then brought him back to the entry area. 2 female officers were there, listening to and recording Joe's story. Her ties had been taken off, and paramedics were looking after Joe, the hurt men, and the woman on the floor. The police officers gathered together, talked, and one of them came over to Chris. He removed the handcuffs and asked Chris to show his hands. The officer checked his fists, smiled, and said, "I just wanted to make sure you weren't hiding anything. You really took care of this group, including the woman with the knife." The son with the hurt knee was handcuffed and taken to the hospital with police assistance. The woman had come to and was upset, saying the handcuffs were too tight and that she was being treated unfairly since the man who had hurt her was not handcuffed. The officers explained that he had the right to defend himself against trespassers who were threatening his roommate. They told her that she had no right to be in the apartment and that he was just protecting himself from the knife she had. They explained this multiple times and asked her to quiet down or they would have to use tape to cover her mouth. Papa Scumbag and his 2 sons were complaining about their injuries, saying Chris attacked them for no reason. When one officer laughed and pointed at Joe, they claimed she attacked them first. They said they had to tie her up to keep her from hurting them when they came to take her back home. The officers chuckled. One pointed at Joe and said, "So 4 big men were scared of her? She's not even 5'6" or weighs more than 110 pounds. The officers then helped the men stand up and took them to their patrol cars. Joe's mom, whose face looked worse than Joe's, complained about coming to get her daughter, saying that man had attacked her, and it was wrong to arrest her and her sons when that man caused all the trouble. Chris's lawyer arrived just in time to see the scumbags being taken away. He went inside, found Chris holding Joe, and asked if everything was all right. Chris said he thought so, but they needed to discuss everything while it was clear in his mind, if the lawyer had time. He did, so Chris got Joe some ice packs for her face, brewed coffee, and they sat at the table. Chris paid the lawyer a small fee, signed a contract, and they shared the full story, including what the men and the woman said while waiting for help. The lawyer took detailed notes and recorded everything. After they answered his questions, he assured them they were not to blame and that nothing would come from the accusations against them. He asked them to come to his office tomorrow morning to meet with him and the senior partner who handles criminal defense cases. They agreed to come in at 9 a.m. With the entrance and part of the dining area blocked off with yellow tape and investigators collecting evidence, Chris took Joe back to his bedroom and laid her down gently on the bed. He lay beside her, holding her close. He could feel her beginning to lose her strength. She cried for a while, then her tears turned into soft whimpers. How can any woman treat her child like that? I know I shouldn't feel anger toward my mom, but she makes it so easy. Chris comforted her, running his fingers through her hair. Joe, some things are hard to understand and some people make terrible choices. You didn't do anything to deserve this. They have their own issues and your dad is dangerous. They will be away for a long time and you won't have to face them again. He continued to hold her and rub her back. He was surprised but happy when she fell asleep in his arms. After half an hour with Joe sleeping peacefully, he got up to check on the investigators. They told him it would take several more hours, so he ordered a large pizza and wings. He knew his girlfriend would wake up hungry. 20 minutes later, Joe came into the kitchen wearing jeans and a t-shirt, just as Chris returned from the patio with their food. The front entrance was blocked off because of the investigation, so he had to come around to pay the delivery person. As expected, she was very hungry and wanted a Dr. Pepper. She ate 1 slice more than Chris, enjoyed 2 wings extra, and drank almost a liter of soda. After finishing, she laughed and settled comfortably on Chris's lap. Although there were still investigators in the area, she wanted to feel close to him. "How many times are you going to rescue me, Sir Galahad?" she asked while resting against him. "As many times as it takes, Lady Joe. As many times as it takes." After a long night filled with ups and downs, they got up to get ready to meet their lawyers. Chris called work to inform them, but they already knew. Bob put the call on speaker and Trey began with, "Is Joe okay?" Chris switched his phone to speaker mode and said, "Joe, someone wants to know if you're all right. Do you want to talk to him?" "Is it Mr. Beck?" she asked. "No, sweetie, it's Trey, and we're worried about you. Sandra was up half the night praying and hoping you and Chris are both okay. Are you?" "I've had better days, but I thank God for Chris. He helped me through what happened and comforted me all night. He seems to be doing well this morning, but that was a hard experience for both of us. Thank you and Sandy for being so kind. Honey, we haven't spent much time with you, but we care about you. As for Chris, he's one of the kindest people you'll meet. Unless someone threatens those he cares for, then he has to be strong. Take all the time you both need, Chris. We have your plans, and Bob is going to the site with Jimbo to keep things moving. Don't stress about work, focus on taking care of Joe." "Hi, Joe and Chris. This is Bob. After we hang up, I will call my wife to update her. Everyone is worried about you, so please look after each other. Just let me know when you're ready to come back, Chris, and don't worry, we'll handle everything." Hearing how much people cared made Joe emotional again, and she wondered why everyone was so nice to her except her mother. After saying hello, the chief defense lawyer, Darren Howard, told them that he had read Mark's notes from their conversation the night before and listened to his recordings. "There are a few things we need to talk about, if you're comfortable." Both said they were okay with it, so Mr. Howard started asking about how they ended up living together, with Joe away from her mother. He focused on Joe, so she began sharing her story, talking about her childhood, her mother's struggles, and moving in with Elwood and his sons when she was 15. She mentioned that she did most of the cleaning and cooking when she was home, but tried to stay at school as much as she could because she did not feel safe there. She shared how a deputy sheriff and social worker helped protect her until she was old enough, how she heard Elwood and his sons making plans for her birthday, and how she wanted to finish school early and get scholarships to TCU. Chris listened carefully, observing both Joe and the lawyers. At first, the attorneys seemed professional, though concerned when she started sharing, but their expressions changed to frowns as she talked about the ongoing difficulties she faced. The mood lifted when she reminisced about meeting Chris, getting a ride from him, their friendship, and the happy moments they shared. When it came to the previous night, they encouraged her to express not just what happened, but how she felt. The video captured both her words and emotions, and for the first time she spoke about feeling helpless and scared by the threats from the people she had to live with before. Her strongest feelings were anger towards her mother, but she also felt heartbroken by her actions. She said she had always known that Elwood and his sons were bad people, but now she realized her mother was too. Sometimes she cried and wondered if she would become a bad person like her mother since they shared the same genes. She also said she would feel devastated if her mother or anyone else hurt Chris. When she finished speaking, both lawyers were very moved and felt angry. "Chris, we need to talk about your story again. But first, Joe, can I share this video with the district attorney? I don't want anyone to make a deal that lets these bad people get away with short sentences. The DA has a daughter who recently turned 15, and I think showing her this video will help ensure they get severe punishments. I know this includes your mother, but she seems just as dangerous as the men." Joe looked at Chris, who whispered to her. "Maybe they will get her help for her issues and give her a chance to learn a new skill or get a better education. She must be smart to have you, but she's made a mess of her life." Joe turned back to the lawyers and said she agreed. Howard called in an assistant and asked her to prepare a form for Joe to sign. "Now, Chris, we need more details about how you handled 4 men and a woman with a knife without getting too hurt," Howard said. Chris showed them his hands, which were bruised and scratched, then laughed. They all chuckled together, thinking he did well given the situation with 5 tough people, 2 of whom had knives. They asked Chris how he felt during the struggle, whether he used too much force or just enough to stop the attackers, and other details they believed the bad people might try to use as excuses. Since they had no strong defense, the lawyers thought the bad people might blame the victims. Feeling confident that Chris's story would stand up in questioning and in court, they had Joe sign the form and promised to keep them updated. It was after 11, so they decided to have an early lunch. This gave Joe a chance to think about her mother's mistakes. Chris listened and then asked about her grandparents. She had never met them, but her mother said they were very strict and terrible parents. Joe wondered if her mother was even worse. Chris then asked if she knew anything about the man her mother said was her real father. Jo shared the story her mother had told her. She had met a man she called Kennedy in a bar where she worked as a waitress. He had offered her drinks and drugs. She spent the night with him, and the next day, he left. She couldn't recall his name or much about his appearance, but he mentioned being the black sheep of the Kennedy family. Chris tucked that away, planning to look into it later. After lunch, Chris suggested they stop by his work site to check on things and see if any help was needed. Jo mentioned she had been assigned a dorm room and wanted to see it with him. He hid his nervousness about her moving, but said yes, as long as she went to the stadium with him first. She agreed, asking if he thought they were both dressed too nicely. He laughed and said, "The guys could use a nice surprise, and you'll definitely be that." On their way, he playfully urged her to show the strong and confident woman he knew her to be. She laughed and asked how far she should take it. He chuckled, telling her to just be herself. And she was. Her knee-length dress had a high neckline and long sleeves, but flared out, swishing as she walked in her 3-inch heels. It revealed more of her lovely legs compared to when she sat modestly, and since they were on a walkway above the construction crews, everyone could see. Like when a crowd goes quiet at a big event, work stopped when their boss arrived with this beautiful young lady beside him. Bob grinned, while Jimbo, who had not met her before, stared in surprise. "Is that her? No wonder Trey said what he did." As they approached, Bob shouted, "So, how did your meeting go?" Jo gave a bright smile, and Chris replied that things went so well he hoped to be back the next day. With Jo beside him, looking around at the work and the staring workers, Chris asked if they needed anything from him. They said no, and Chris turned to Jimbo. "You haven't met Jo yet, have you? Jo, this is Jim Bob Fisher. Jimbo, this is Amy Jo Kennedy." Jo looked surprised. How did he know her full name? Still gracious, she greeted Jimbo, said hello to Bob, and waved at the workers. Chris smiled and called out, "Hey everyone, this is my girlfriend Jo Kennedy. Jo, these are the guys I work with." Jo waved again and said, "It's nice to meet you." They clapped and cheered for her. "You need to take her away or we won't get any work done today," Bob joked. They left, but work didn't resume until Jo was out of sight. "How did I do?" she asked playfully. He wrapped her in his arms and kissed her warmly, then said, "You did more for my reputation in 10 minutes than I could do in a month. Anyone with a girlfriend like you must be an impressive guy." They drove to the dorm, parked, and watched as students and their parents moved things in. This time, Jo took his hand, marking her territory against the pretty girls watching him. He noticed and said, "Wow, you won't be the only pretty girl in this dorm. Some of the new arrivals are really attractive." She realized he was just joking, so she replied, "Ha ha, look at all the attractive boys moving in. I might enjoy this more than I thought if my boyfriend doesn't treat me well." They smiled at each other. Her room was nice, and they met her roommate and suite mates, who were all friendly, nice-looking, and clearly came from wealthy families. Jo talked comfortably with them despite their different backgrounds. They were impressed by her successful boyfriend who was involved in building a new stadium, which made Jo feel proud. They took pictures of Jo and Chris together, and then he took pictures of the 4 suite mates in different fun poses. Jo chatted all the way back to the apartment about her first impressions of her suite mates. They packed up her belongings and took them back in the Jeep, as they had promised Kate, Elle, and Grace they would. It was surprising when more girls came to the room for introductions and pictures. The news had spread quickly. As they drove away, Chris said, "Honey, I think some of those girls are a bit wild. They were crowding around me while we were taking pictures." Jo made sure their last night as roommates was special, and she wanted to make sure he had good memories before he left. She tried to argue when Chris suggested she take the Jeep and get a parking sticker for it. "Jo, I have 2 vehicles plus the work truck. Why should I have 3 cars taking up space at the apartment? Besides, if you want to visit me sometimes, you'll need a way to get around. Unless you want me to come into the dorm to pick you up." She knew he was just joking, but she felt a pang of jealousy. "When you put it that way, maybe I should. I promise I won't drive it too much or have a lot of people in it or—" "Jo, it's just a car. I already added your name to the insurance, so feel free to use it whenever you need to. I trust you to be responsible. Of course, I don't want you driving after you've been drinking, but otherwise, use it however you like." She looked shocked. Chris, I would never do something like that. I'm only 18, I can't even drink legally, and I sure won't. Oh, you're teasing me again. I see that smile. She playfully hit him on the shoulder, but she smiled back. I promise not to make any messes in the back seat of the Jeep if you promise not to make any in the back seat of the Ram or on the sheets at the apartment. So, the couch, tables, and chairs are fine? He asked playfully, and was lightly scolded again. Only if you want some marks on the furniture in the dorm, she replied with a grin. Are you saying we're in a committed relationship now? Like going steady? Chris responded, taking her hands in his. That might make the fraternity parties less fun. Instead of joking back, she became serious, rested her head on his chest, and said, I'm only yours. You need to decide if you are only mine. I'm yours, he answered earnestly. She reached around his neck, pulled him down, and kissed him deeply. And I'm yours. At that moment, Jo had no idea how that promise would be tested. She approached college just like she had tackled everything else in her life. For the next 3 weeks, she spent her time in class, studying, working on projects, or with Chris. Much of her studying took place in his apartment because it was quieter, and he was a helpful resource. Like most freshmen, she needed to learn how to listen, take notes, and study in new ways. Many college professors preferred to focus on research and writing rather than teaching, so students often turned to their graduate assistant, GA, for help or hired a tutor. She tried the GA for a tough course, but he seemed more interested in flirting than helping her learn, so she turned to Chris. He was a patient tutor who helped her understand what she needed to succeed in her coursework and projects. He taught her that remembering and understanding were just the start. To truly excel, she needed to be able to apply, analyze, evaluate, and create with what she learned. Unfortunately, like many schools, since accountability testing became a trend, the schools in Arkansas where she had studied focused more on what would be tested than on gaining knowledge and skills that would help students in the real world after school. This issue wasn't the fault of the teachers or administrators. If students didn't pass the state tests, they faced consequences. If enough students failed, the teachers and schools also faced trouble. Schools had to make sure every student passed, often forgetting to teach things that would help kids in real life. The tests focused on basic skills, memorization, and choosing answers from options like A, B, C, or D. Because of this, more time was spent on preparing for tests instead of deeper learning. Jo remembered how much more engaging and creative learning happened after the tests, compared to the months leading up to them. With Chris's help, she learned how to study, use what she learned, and think critically about her work, whether it was a paper or a project. She didn't want to be an engineer like Chris, but she began to appreciate how engineers solve problems, build big structures, and tackle challenges, whether made by people or nature. At first it was tough, but she was smart, eager, and determined, so she started to do really well. But college wasn't just about studying. She enjoyed learning and meeting new people. Some students grumbled about taking required courses in philosophy and psychology, but Jo found them intriguing. She took a challenging biology course, which she had skipped the introductory level, and while the lab was intimidating at first, she eagerly absorbed everything they taught and felt wiser each day. Then there were the parties. She attended a few on campus, but with friends Kate, Lynn, and Mary, she organized an exciting Super Bowl party at Chris's apartment. They invited a lot of people, and soon it was clear that they needed a bigger space. By Super Bowl Sunday, they updated everyone that the party location changed to the community center in the apartment complex, outlining what snacks and drinks to bring. They had too many guests for an apartment gathering, and it was a big job for everyone to prepare food and drinks. The game itself had a low score, 133 in favor of the Patriots, which wasn't exciting for many and left some bored. The halftime show with Maroon 5 and some rappers entertained some guests, but not Chris. By the start of the third quarter, someone suggested they play music and dance in a different area of the center, away from the TVs. Jo was enthusiastic about the idea, so the man who arranged the building for the night spent much of the second half dancing with his girlfriend, who wore a Patriots jersey. She wore short shorts under her jersey, but all you could see were white knee-high socks and red shoes, along with her legs and a red jersey with white numbers and blue details. Jo managed the music, creating a nice mix of country, ballroom, rock, and hip-hop, playing around 5 songs from each style. For once, Chris didn't mind the hip-hop. It let him grab a beer, check the game, and admire his girlfriend's amazing moves, as long as the crowd wasn't too thick to see her. When the game finished, the dance floor got busy during the country, rock, or hip-hop tunes, but Joe and Chris had it mostly to themselves during the ballroom songs. A few people danced gracefully, but for the cha-cha and tango, they were the main dancers. It seemed every young man there admired Joe, who sparkled on the dance floor no matter the style. The tango they performed left many young women admiring Chris too, perhaps even Joe. Lynn, Mary, and Joe stood by the door saying goodbye and accepting compliments from those leaving around 1 in the morning, while Chris, Don, John, and some friends organized the space. When asked if she needed a ride, mostly by hopeful guys, Joe said she had to help clean up and already arranged for a ride after that. It wasn't really untrue. She did assist with cleaning while chatting with the other women, and she indeed got a ride afterward. She wanted to wash off the sweat, but Chris playfully coaxed her to dance and then gently wiped the beads of sweat from her face and legs. They shared more playful moments before he finally took a break. Chris was full of energy that night and was ready for more fun the next morning as well. After an enthusiastic start to the day, Chris headed to work, while Joe skipped her first class and dragged herself to the second at 11. She promised herself never to keep him waiting for more than a week again. He was too much to handle. By Wednesday, Joe felt better and was in a playful mood. She hadn't seen Chris since early Monday morning, so just before lunch she wore her new leather boots and a matching skirt with a red sweater. She convinced Elle and Kate to walk to the stadium with her. On their way, she shared her plan, and they made a big entrance from the southwest corner. They giggled, laughed, posed, and Joe pointed excitedly at Chris, who was at the far end. They walked down the path near the stands, catching everyone's attention. Even the crane stopped. Chris was focused on some plans, but Jimbo noticed the quiet and followed the workers' gazes. "Chris, we might have to reduce your pay if your girlfriend keeps halting work like this, and now she's brought 2 friends. Chris looked up and saw Joe and her friends nearby, setting the plans aside. He felt happy to see her, but a little shy about the scene she was causing. He approached them with a smile. Joe rushed to him, hugged him, and kissed him. Kate and Ella joined, and he hugged them too after Joe finished. Loudly, since they were close, Joe exclaimed, "Honey, we've been invited to the Tri-Delta's winter formal on Valentine's Day. Will you go with me, please?" He smiled back and said he'd be honored. She jumped into his arms again, shouted, "Thank you," and gave him another quick kiss. Joe mentioned they could sort out the details this weekend, but that he would need a tuxedo. He nodded, said goodbye to the other girls, winked, and joked, "I'm glad it's almost lunch because it looks like we won't get anything done around here for a while, especially if you leave the way you came in." Joe promised it would be fun if he agreed to join them for lunch at Dutch's. He happily agreed and walked back to his plans. By the time the girls reached the end, everyone was watching them, and they stayed locked on until the girls disappeared from view. Then all eyes turned back to Chris. "What? You guys have partners too, and they have friends, right?" he called out. "Not like that," was shouted back, followed by laughter and chatter in the stadium. "All right, take an early lunch. You won't get any work done for an hour anyway." They cheered and went off to grab their lunches. Jimbo patted Chris on the shoulder and said, "The more I see you, the more I understand why folks talk about you. Bob, it's time for Chris's mid-year review. I need to meet with you and Jimbo this afternoon at 3 if that works for you both. If not, just suggest another time." "I think that will work, Trey. Jimbo is supposed to be in the office this afternoon. He says he's wasting his time on site when Chris is there anyway." "But boss, if you're hoping for anything but glowing reviews, you better get someone else to sit in. We're both really impressed." "See you at 3, the CEO said with a smile. The next day, Jimbo arrived at 1 o'clock. "Hey, Chris, Trey needs you in the office at 2. It's time for your mid-year evaluation." "Oh no, I forgot about that. I haven't done my self-evaluation." "Like that's going to stop you from getting it anyway. Just be there at 2, Jimbo replied with a grin. At 1:55, Chris was welcomed by Tina, Tim Beck's assistant, who led him to the office. He walked in to see Bob Elliott already there with Mr. Beck, and the others had serious expressions. After polite greetings, Beck started speaking. "Chris, I have to say that you've accomplished some good things in the last 6 months. You helped restore the historic bathhouses. You had the courage to revisit the plans for the stadium expansion and present them to the university and their architects. But Bob, Jimbo, and I have a few worries. Beck delivered his praise with a calm voice, but his frown during the last part made Elliot mirror the expression. Chris felt his heart race, but he noticed hints of amusement in their faces. Bob Elliott then spoke. I remember the first time you caused a work delay, and Jimbo mentioned there was another delay recently. Although your teams are ahead of schedule, we're worried about these interruptions. Now they were barely holding back their smiles, and Chris understood. With a serious yet concerned look, he responded, Sir, I'm not sure what you're referring to. I don't recall causing any delays. Could you be more specific? They both laughed. He's a real poker player, too, Beck said to Elliot once the laughter settled down. Chris looked confused, but a smile appeared. Jimbo asked the security guard why he let her in a second time when she arrived with friends. He turned red and replied, I'm sorry, boss, but I couldn't tell her no. She walks in, greets me by name, gives me her wonderful smile, asks about my family, and walks right in like she owns the place. I don't think anyone can say no to her, and I certainly can't. Jimbo loves to tell that story, and he admits he couldn't say no either, so I guess it's up to you, Chris. Mr. Beck, after being around her a few times, do you really think she'll accept no from me? They all laughed again. On a more serious note, here are your bonuses for completing the last project early and under budget, saving us and the university a lot of money and time on the stadium project. These are the documents we need you to read and sign. I think you'll be happy with them. Chris read his evaluation and felt a bit embarrassed. Luckily, he hadn't submitted his own evaluation because it wasn't nearly as kind. There were many things he could have done better. When he opened the envelope with his bonus checks, he nearly choked. Looking up at his smiling bosses, he said, These are way too generous. The evaluation is far too generous, but the bonuses are incredible. We recommend you contact your investment advisors quickly, Chris, or you might end up giving too much to the government. Yes, sir, I will do that right away, and thank you. I think you're being really nice, but I really appreciate it. And we believe you deserve it, Chris. Have you checked out any grad schools? I have, and I've focused on 2 good options. Nothing much in Texas, but Penn State and Colorado have the kind of hands-on courses where I learn best. I'm not sure if they will give me any credit for my past work, but it sounds like they might. I want to finish in a year, so I plan to take summer classes to help me do that. I'm not really interested in a school that overlooks my experience and treats me like a recent graduate, or thinks that only classroom learning is important. My next step is to see if either school will recognize my experience. Do you have any advice on this? Let's bring in Sam. He's a proud CU Buffalo. Sam was sure that Colorado was the best choice. He knew the head of the engineering school well and could help Chris. Trey smiled. You can tell him we just got a contract for a 12-story building in Boulder, and we can offer paid internships to other students if Chris gets credit for his experience and can serve as assistant manager on the project. Sam told them not to worry, asked for a copy of Chris's latest evaluation, and instructed Chris to fill out the admissions forms online. Chris walked away feeling amazed, with the rest of the afternoon off and a strong urge to cash the checks. By the end of February, Joe was adjusting to campus life and schoolwork, but the social side was more difficult. One big reason was that she drew attention wherever she went. Without trying, she attracted many boys, which led to girls wanting to be around her for their own reasons, not for friendship. With more girls around, more boys were interested, and her social circle kept expanding. She felt confused about who to trust because many girls were not genuine, and some boys just wanted her attention. Joe had a scholarship and had to keep her grades up. Many of her classmates came from wealthy families, so they just needed to focus on getting passing grades. The girls wanted her to join various activities and help them with dating. The boys wanted to spend time with her, but when she wouldn't date, they asked her to share meals or watch shows instead. She wasn't good at saying no to their constant requests and pressure, which was starting to take away from her study time. She couldn't afford to eat at fancy restaurants or shop like the other students, but they were so persuasive that she sometimes went along with them just to avoid conflict. At this rate, her limited spending money wouldn't last until spring break, but if she let someone else pay, They seemed to expect more from her. The friends around her and the guys trying to impress her loved to take pictures and share them online. She didn't want to say no, but it felt like everyone wanted to pose with her. Being seen so often with girls who wore little clothing or with boys who leaned close to her made it look like she was just there for fun and not focused on school or her relationship with Chris. This led to a video call from Chris's sisters, who had some strong words for her. She cried as she tried to explain the pressure she was under, but they were not convinced. Diane told her to be brave and learn to say no. If that didn't work, say an even stronger no. Then they shared advice on how to handle tough situations with some of their classmates. Just as a warning, they mentioned that their mom had talked to Chris earlier to see how he felt without making it obvious that there was a problem. He had replied, "Yes, I know, I see social media too. I don't own her. She's a college student now and she's figuring things out. There's not much I can do." "But it's not what it looks like. I promise I haven't done anything wrong," she said. "And how does Chris know this? He says he hardly sees you or hears from you. He's dealing with important matters right now, and you're not included." "I've been so busy. But we had a date to the winter formal on Valentine's Day, and he didn't say anything. I'll call him tonight and explain." "Good luck. Telling him you can't talk because you're always with other guys might not go as well as you think. How would you feel if you saw him in the same situations he's seen you in?" As soon as they ended the call, she tried to reach him. He didn't answer, so she left a message asking him to return her call. As she waited, tears came, and she fell asleep. The next day, when Chris got home from work, he immediately noticed his bright orange Jeep parked next to his truck. Hope surged in his chest as he wondered if Joe was inside. But then he remembered how distant she had been since their date. It was likely she was just returning his keys and moving on. The winter formal had been fun, but also troubling. Joe looked stunning in a champagne-colored gown she borrowed from Kate. She only had eyes for him and danced solely with him, but after they returned to his apartment, things had felt complicated. What troubled him most were the many guys who had approached her, greeting her like they were close friends. Chris thought about how, even though she spent a lot of time studying, she still had time to meet and make new friends, including many wealthy fraternity boys and athletes. Chris had expected this, but it still bothered him. Even though she noticed him, turned down dance invites, and introduced him to others as "my boyfriend," or "this is the boyfriend I've told you about," he felt uneasy about the changes in their connection. He understood that her popularity was a part of her college journey, but it made him a bit worried, especially since she seemed more distant. As soon as he walked into the apartment, she rushed over, hugged him, and asked, "Can we talk?" He smiled gently but replied, "Not right now. I have an appointment in 20 minutes. You can come with me if you want, or wait here and we can talk later." Surprised by his calmness, she decided to go with him. "Do I look okay to go with you?" she asked. Looking at her fitted jeans and sweater, he nodded. "I'll be back in a few minutes after I shower. We're meeting at a place called Uncle Julio's over on Camp Bowie, so we need to hurry." In 10 minutes, he returned, freshened up and wearing her favorite cologne. He was casually dressed in boots, jeans, and a sweater. She thought he looked great, and he thought she looked even more beautiful, but he quickly took her hand and led her to his truck. "I won't be in the way at your meeting, right?" she asked as he navigated through the busy traffic. "Not at all. I appreciate your thoughts, so you'll be helpful. I haven't had a chance to talk with you much since the ball, but I received some nice bonuses and a good pay raise on February 15th. My financial advisors suggest I invest my bonuses and some earnings in real estate, so I'm meeting with my realtor to look at some places." "Wow, that sounds great," she said, impressed. "They're not huge bonuses, but together with my investment returns, my advisors say I need to buy things that can help with taxes or I'll end up paying too much. I found a few properties online that interest me, but I need to check them out first, so I'm glad you came along. Sometimes a different perspective is helpful." The realtor, Tina, was a tall, elegant woman whom Joe guessed to be in her early 30s. She wore wedding rings but still seemed to take a lot of interest in Chris, while barely acknowledging Joe. While waiting for their tacos, Tina moved her chair close to Chris. She rested her shoulder against his and held her phone up for him to see. In a tone that felt more casual than business, she said, "Let me show you some photos I took of the places you chose, plus a new listing I got today that I think you'll like even more." The phone was tilted away from Joe, making it hard for her to see the pictures. She shot a sharp look at the realtor, playfully threatening to sit close to Chris to get a better view. Once the phone was turned to include her, she noticed that all the houses and their yards looked nice. Still, Joe understood that Chris would hold off on his opinion until he saw them in person. The carne asada tacos were delicious. Tina paid for the meal and invited them to ride with her to discuss the benefits and drawbacks of each property. Joe hopped into the second seat of Tina's BMW SUV, feeling a bit uneasy as Tina showed off her long legs and spoke in a cheerful tone while driving. Joe almost nudged Chris for staring, but he eventually shifted his gaze to Tina and joined the conversation. Any of the 4 houses Chris picked would make a great home and a wise investment. They all had easy access to main roads, were in tidy neighborhoods, and had good-sized yards. Joe had no particular favorite, and while Chris seemed satisfied, he was not overly excited. Maybe it was how he held her hand or valued her opinion on the kitchens and bathrooms, but Tina started to warm up to Joe after they visited the first house. She included Joe in their chat. Joe tried not to smile too much at feeling she had won for now. But then Joe realized that Tina could easily win Chris's attention while Joe was at school. This made Joe work a little harder to connect with Tina, hoping that if they became friends, Tina might not try to get too close to Chris. Then it struck her. If Tina was willing to cheat on her husband, being friends wouldn't matter at all. Joe needed to focus on rekindling her closeness with Chris. As the sun began to set, they turned off General Pershing Drive onto a street that ended at a large house surrounded by what looked like several acres of woods. The 3-story wooden house needed some repair, with its roofs showing signs of age. What stood out were the 2 third-floor towers, a big stained glass window beneath a roof overhang, and the many windows on the lower floors. Each level also had its own covered porch. The yard and gardens needed some attention, as did the several outbuildings and the garage. When they parked in front of the house, Joe spotted an old pickup truck and a classic car through the open doors of what looked like a barn. "Everything comes with the house, including the old vehicles and the tractor in the barn," Tina told them. "This is the 7 acres that the Kittlers kept from the original farm run by his grandfather. It has a creek at the back, is full of trees, and I think the land is worth more than the house. Their 2 kids live in Los Angeles and just want to sell it. They wanted a quick sale, so I gave them a price range, and they chose the lower end because they thought time was more important than price. I think they still believe Texas real estate prices are what they were 30 years ago. I immediately thought of you because this could be both a home and an investment. If you pay the asking price, you would still have about $50,000 left for repairs, based on what you were willing to spend on other houses. I'm working with both the buyer and the seller, so I have to be careful, but you have cash and they want a fast sale. You can make your decision from there." Chris walked around the outside, checking the house and foundation like a good engineer and construction manager. When he went inside, he focused only on how solid the building was, looking at the electrical system, HVAC, and plumbing. The 2 women were curious about his different way of looking at this house compared to the others. After that, he returned to the front door and moved through each room on the first floor, carefully checking the floors, windows, doors, and walls. He went up the curved staircase to the second floor, studying the stairs first before examining everything up there. The staircase to the 3rd floor was straight, with beautifully carved railings. The 3rd floor had a loft bedroom with a full bathroom, while the rest was unfinished and seemed to be used for storage. Chris didn't seem let down. He was focused on the house's overall quality and potential, not how past owners had used it. They followed him back downstairs. "Where is the door to the basement?" he asked. Tina looked surprised. "I don't know, it's not in my notes." They started looking around and found the door at the end of a short hallway that had the pantry. It was dark and musty, so Chris went in alone, using his phone's flashlight. He walked down the stairs, explored a bit, opened some creaky doors, and then came back. Chris turned to Tina. $50,000 won't fix this place the way it should be, and neither will $100,000. If I offer them $38,000 less than the asking price, payable at closing, will you lower your commission by 1% on either side? If you do, I'll use you as my agent for purchasing land in Bosque County at the same rate. Tina considered his offer, while Joe looked at him in disbelief. He kept a calm face until Tina asked, "Can you tell me more about the property deal in Bosque County? I know that area a bit, but I've mostly worked in Tarrant, Johnson, and Somervell counties." "Joe, you have to promise not to tell my sisters or Mom about this, or you need to leave." She agreed to keep it quiet, so he went on. "My dad and I found a piece of land for sale near where Steel Creek meets Lake Whitney. It's in Bosque County, just east of the small town of Morgan. That's about an hour and a half from here. The spot has great access to the lake and would be a perfect place to build a vacation home on a small hill that goes down to the lake on one side and to the creek on the other. The owner is selling 160 acres, but is keeping another 160 acres next to it. We want to buy this land for a vacation home. Maybe Mom and Dad will retire there in a few years if I stay nearby and Donna goes to TCU. We've talked to the owners, an older couple. They've had the land since the 1880s and they raise cattle on it. We will probably lease the grazing land to them so we can keep the agricultural exemption, at least until Dad moves down." Chris laughed lightly. "He thinks he'd like to be a Texan with a ranch, just like the people from Tennessee who followed Davy Crockett. I just want to buy a boat and some wave runners to enjoy the lake when I have free time." Tina looked at him like he was a big opportunity. Joe looked at him with confusion. "So, Tina, what's it going to be? A quick sale and a commission, or wait to see if you can find another buyer for this place?" Tina's face lit up with excitement. "You've got a deal, Mr. Alexander. I'll need more details about the lakefront property so I can represent you well, but I'll get this signed and finalized as soon as I can. If they won't accept $38,000 less, can I come back with a counteroffer?" "Absolutely. But let me quickly write a summary of the work needed to make the place safe and livable. I can probably send it to you later tonight. Feel free to share it with them, and also mention that anyone else will likely bring in someone to check the condition of the house and estimate the repair costs. That will take quite a while, probably months. I've already done that, while other buyers might be scared off by repair costs. I know construction and contractors, so I can get everything done quicker and for less money than most people. That's because it's my field. So I won't ask for as big a discount as another buyer might. Most importantly, as you mentioned, if they sell to me, they can have the money in their account as soon as we complete the survey and title search and finish the legal paperwork. It should be within a month if they cooperate." Chris and Tina toured the property, assessing the condition of the outbuildings, barn, and garage. Chris noted that while the structures were solid, they would need some repairs and cosmetic updates. After taking a brief look around, they headed towards the creek, but as it was getting too dark, they returned to Tina's car. Chris pointed to the old buildings, explaining, "This area isn't in high demand for development, and the back section is in a floodplain, which lowers its value for developers. However, some might see it as an opportunity to build inexpensive homes on small lots. Others might just see these buildings as something to tear down." He added, "I'd prefer to restore them and turn the place into something beautiful, rather than let it go to waste. If the current owners just want to sell quickly, it might not matter to them, but I want you to know in case it does." On the way back, Tina asked for more information about another property near the lake. Chris shared details about the access roads and other features. He mentioned that the sale was being handled by the elderly owners and their lawyer, without a real estate agent, so Tina would only be representing the buyers. She requested survey information, and Chris promised to send it the next day. Joe remained quiet during the tour, but once they were driving back to the apartment, she finally spoke up. "Just how wealthy are you, Christian Michael Alexander?" Chris responded calmly. "I do all right for a 25-year-old, and my father is wealthy as well. Why? Thinking about marrying me for my money?" Joe laughed softly. "No, I've got a different reason for that," she said, her tone playful before turning more serious. "But I have to admit, you're really intense when you're doing business. I've never seen that side of you before." They reached his apartment, and as they got out of the truck, Joe asked, "So, what now? Should I head back to the dorm, or can I stay with you tonight?" Chris smiled. "If you're free, I'd love for you to stay. I wasn't sure about your other plans, or I would have asked sooner." Joe took his hand as they went inside, and they spent the evening together, enjoying each other's company in a peaceful and affectionate way, sharing the warmth of their relationship without any rush or pressure. The night was filled with gentle moments, and the two simply embraced the connection they had built over time, without needing anything more than each other's presence. "Mine," he declared, kissing her arms, shoulders, neck, and each little inch of her belly. She hurriedly tried to take off her pants, growing more excited with every gentle kiss on her legs and feet. When he shouted, "Only mine!" she was filled with joy and tugging at his hair. Within moments, her delight became clear. They moved to the bed, and her laughter echoed long into the night. Tina didn't receive the documents she asked for until the next day. Over coffee, Jo attempted to apologize for her questionable posts on social media and for being distant. Chris quieted her with a smile, saying, "I want you to enjoy your college life. There's nothing to apologize for. Just a bunch of happy college students having fun. Just remember what's important to me, and I will do the same for you, and we can spend time together whenever you have free time." "Don't make me that offer. I might just drop everything and stay here if this is what you mean by spending time together," she replied playfully. "Are we good then?" she asked more seriously after another sip of coffee and a bite of her breakfast biscuit. "Of course, but we need to plan a weekend to meet and talk soon. There's a lot going on in my life that I want you to know about, but not when we're rushed. When will you be free?" "I'm available this weekend, but I have a lot of studying to do. It's better to be here than in the dorm, but just so you know, midterms are next week and then we have spring break coming up. Kate wants me to go with her family to their ski chalet in Park City, Utah. I'd like to go, but I also want to spend time with you, so we need to figure that out too." As the weekend arrived, both were greeted with surprises. She shared more details about the ski trip, including that some boys Kate's cousins would be joining them. Her dad was sending his jet to pick them up on Saturday and would bring them back the following Friday. She was unsure about going, but she wanted to meet Kate's family and try skiing, and she noted that she could spend the following weekend with him. He encouraged her to go and enjoy herself, mentioning he would be busy all week anyway, and they could meet up when she came back. Then it was his turn to share big news. He had been accepted into graduate school at Colorado University. He would begin on July 1st, living, working, and studying in Boulder for a whole year. After that, he would earn a master's degree in architectural engineering. With this new degree, his role at Beck Construction would shift. More office time, less field work, and not needing to travel far from home. This changed their plans about buying a house in Fort Worth and getting a lake property nearby. Jo was taken aback. Grad school had never come up before, and the idea of being apart from him for a year scared her. She told him so. "I'll get you a ticket on American Airlines and you can visit me whenever you want. There are ski slopes nearby. Rocky Mountain National Park is just an hour away, and plenty of other things to enjoy. That is, if you want to leave the bedroom," he joked. "I'll come to the house whenever I can. We will be together during Thanksgiving and Christmas, and it's spring break, so we won't really be apart for a full year. If you go to summer school this first semester, you can spend the second semester with me in Boulder. Next summer, you can do the opposite and spend the first semester with me. See what I mean? Right now, I only see you every few weeks for a night or a weekend. With my work and your classes, we just don't have enough time. Next year will be tough, but we can make the most of our time apart so we can be together when we can." He then added playfully, "We can even video chat every night and we'll be just fine." Jo laughed and said, "Not that it wouldn't be fun, but I much prefer being with you in person, and I'll miss your kisses as well." They spent most of the rest of the weekend with Jo studying and Chris looking into the lake property and figuring out repairs for the old house and its buildings. During breaks, he shared his ideas for the Kittler house and asked her advice. The project seemed a bit too much for her to think about all at once, so she suggested updating the kitchen, bathrooms, and laundry area and improving the lighting throughout the house. It looked like some lovely lights had been replaced with cheap fixtures, and fluorescent lights did not belong in that beautiful home. They still found time to work out together and enjoyed some private moments on the various pieces of furniture in the house. Jo told Chris she really hoped he got the big old house with all its buildings. It would take a long time to enjoy all those spaces fully. Jo was thrilled the next Friday night she had aced her exams and had a 4.0 at midterm. She drove to his apartment to celebrate, then hurried back to the dorm the next morning to get ready before the private jet picked them up at noon. But the new week brought bad weather for the stadium project. A cold front moved in around 10 a.m., mixing with moisture from a storm near Baja California, as the weather report said. The heavy rain was caused by a mix of weather conditions, but colder air was moving in and would bring lower temperatures by Tuesday afternoon. The rain would change to sleet and then snow, continuing until Thursday night or Friday morning. On Tuesday at 8 in the morning, Trey made the announcement that all employees would receive pay for 8 hours for each snow day and asked everyone to return to work next Monday. He advised everyone to stay safe and warm and look out for one another before they headed home. An hour later, Chris received a text. "Good morning, Chris. This is Sandra Beck. I just spoke with your parents. The weather is terrible in Tennessee as well, so we've planned a quick ski trip to our place in Utah. Since Donna is on spring break, she's joining us, and we want you to fly with us too. We'd love for Joe to come along if she can. Don't worry about where to stay. We have a 6-bedroom house in Park City with plenty of space. How about a free ski trip with family and friends?" Chris thought for a moment. He didn't want Joe to think he was too eager, but this was a great opportunity. He smiled as he replied, "Funny enough, Joe is already there. When do we leave?" "Meet us at Spinks Airport at noon. It's northeast of 35 in Burleson. Your parents are bringing your ski gear, so just pack some clothes for hanging out at the house and for going out. We definitely plan to eat at our favorite restaurant Wednesday night, which has a semi-formal dress code. Wear whatever else you like." When Chris got to Spinks Airport at 11:40, he saw the Embraer Legacy 500 waiting outside the private terminal. He had been on private jets before, but nothing quite like this one. His excitement allowed him to sit in the co-pilot's chair and explore the cockpit. It was all high-tech and impressive, just as you'd expect from a $20 million business jet. The flight took just 2 hours from Burleson to Salt Lake City. Trey asked everyone to avoid work talk, quickly shifting to the topic of graduate school. Chris said he would need to take a day off to meet with the dean of the engineering school to discuss getting credit for his experience in construction and management. The rest of the trip was filled with light conversation, including questions about Joe and what she was up to in school. A Ford WD Suburban and driver were waiting for them at the private terminal. The drive through Salt Lake City and into the mountains around Park City took about an hour, with another 15 minutes to reach their house. Fresh snow covered everything, thanks to a storm hitting Texas. The Alexanders arrived a few hours later without Diane, who was off enjoying spring break in the Caribbean with friends. They had already warmed up their 3-story Swiss-style house and were making plans to explore downtown for a meal and visit their favorite bar. Donna spent a few minutes catching up with her big brother before asking if Joe was still in town with her roommate. Chris confirmed that Joe was there until Friday, so Donna sent her a text asking for a call back. Next, Chris called Joe's phone and left a message for her to call when she finished skiing. He wanted to surprise her by showing up at Kate's parents' chalet, so he asked the Becks if they knew the Ellisons from Portland, who owned a vacation home there. They laughed and said they were acquaintances, but definitely knew them. In fact, they had gone to a New Year's Eve party at their place, which was not far away. When Joe did not answer the calls or texts, Chris decided to join the others in the Suburban for their tour of the town and a meal. At 7:30, with still no word from Joe, Donna tried calling her again. After getting no reply, she left another message. After dinner, the Becks and Alexanders wanted to go to their favorite bar, Park City Live, to enjoy some drinks and dancing. Chris seemed unsure, but his lively sister took his arm and urged him, "Come on, Chris. I'll be your date until we hear from Joe. It will be fun." Surprisingly, it was. He danced with Donna, Sandy, his mom, and the wives of 2 couples who joined them after arriving and finding their good friends at the bar. Chris tried calling Joe again and left another message. Donna then called Kate and asked her to have Joe call back, or at least to let her know what was happening, since neither was answering. Mom noticed the worried looks on her children's faces and asked what was wrong. Chris shook his head while Donna said, "We can't find Joe or Kate. Neither is answering their phone or returning messages." "Honey, are you talking about Kate Ellison and her friend Joe?" asked Judy, one of the newcomers at the table. Once Donna confirmed, Judy said, "I saw them with a big group of young people going into the downstairs dance club while we were leaving. We stopped to chat with Kate, who introduced us to Joe. We started our night there, but it got too crowded and noisy, so we moved over here. Do you know where it is, or do you need directions? No, my phone can help with that. Mom, Dad, we're going to take an Uber to join a younger crowd, not that you are old or anything, Donna said with a grin. Chris opened his Uber app and quickly found a car nearby. They rushed out and were driven to the other, livelier dance club. The place was so packed that moving around was tough, but Chris guided his sister through the crowd to the bar. He quickly got himself a beer and Donna a 7-Up and found a tall table that had just been emptied by a couple. Just in time, they took the seats and smiled. One of the guys nearby said, "So, since you took our chairs, can we dance with your girlfriend?" Chris laughed and replied, "She's not my girlfriend, she's my sister. If she wants to dance, just keep your hands to yourself. I'm a very protective big brother." One of the guys took Donna for a dance, and the other asked if he could sit in her spot until she got back. Chris agreed, and they started chatting. The guy's name was Sal, and he said he and his cousin were from El Paso and visited often. When Chris asked if they knew Kate Ellison, Sal answered, "Sure, she's around here somewhere, but her friend is with some troublemakers tonight. They're trying to get them drunk." Sal continued, "People around here know to avoid those guys, but I don't think Kate has been with them before. At least I haven't seen her with them." "How do you know Kate?" Chris asked. "She's a friend of a friend, the blonde you mentioned. Where are they sitting?" Chris frowned, feeling concerned. "Over there at a big table by the band. From your tone, it sounds like the blonde means a lot to you. Wait for my cousin Joey to come back and we'll go with you. They seem tough, but we can handle ourselves," Sal said with a smile. "There they are. Let's meet up with them," Chris suggested. Chris's expression and energy made it easy for them to move across the crowded space. Sal grabbed Joey and Donna and explained what was happening as they followed Chris. When they reached the table, Kate was leaning forward, surrounded by some men. Chris noticed their hands were not behaving appropriately with her. One man had his back to them and was smiling in a way that made Chris uneasy. Chris stepped closer to the man and gripped the back of his neck firmly. The man tensed up and stayed still. Chris leaned in and spoke quietly in his ear. "If you want to walk out of here, you'll answer my questions without causing a scene. I'm going to release some pressure so you can talk, but you will act friendly and cooperate. If you don't, I can make things very serious for you." "I'm sorry, but I can't assist with that." There was a loud snap, and the man stumbled to the ground, still holding onto a gun. Chris turned and saw the man outside trying to get up from the slick, icy street. The stranger, now without clothes, put his hands on the door's step, raised his head to look inside, and suddenly got kicked in the face. He cried out and fell back down. Chris heard sirens but turned back to the woman who was in trouble. Her head tilted to the side, but she kept saying, "No!" and "Stop!" in a faint, slurred voice. He looked for injuries but saw none. Then he struck the attacker and crawled out of the van. A police car roared up and he waved his arms. The car stopped, and 2 officers got out ready for action. He raised a hand and shouted, "This way! She needs help!" An ambulance arrived, and one officer gestured for it to stop near the van while the other kept watch on Chris. "What happened here?" one officer asked firmly. "There's a young woman inside named Amy Jo Kennedy. She's been drugged. I caught 3 men holding her down and hurting her. She's in the van and 2 of them are still here. One has a gun, but I think he's out cold. Please get the paramedics here. They gave her drugs too. I heard them talk about Rohypnol and MDMA. Step away from the van, turn around and walk towards me with your hands behind your back. I need to cuff you while we look into this." Chris followed the instructions, but it wasn't long before he was uncuffed. The 3 men, along with the woman, confirmed his story just by being there. The officers recorded the scene while the medics placed 1 man inside the ambulance. The female medic checked on Jo and covered her with a blanket while the male medic helped the men. They called for more ambulances right away. Another police car was parked outside the club, lights flashing. Chris heard more calls for help from that area and worried about his friend Donna. He informed the nearest officer where he was going and rushed to the club. Donna, Joey, and Sal came outside, following a stretcher. Chris shouted to them, "Are you all okay?" Donna hurried to him, saying Kate was in a bad way and was heading to the hospital. She asked if he was all right and if he found Jo. He nodded, telling her Joe was being taken to Park City Hospital and she was as out of it as Kate. Donna took out her phone to order a ride. Sal and Joey asked if they could go with them, and Donna quickly agreed. Once they got into the small SUV, she called their parents to let them know where they were headed and why. Her parents promised to inform the Ellisons and said they would meet them at the hospital. Chris sat quietly up front, thinking about what he saw when he opened the van door and what he did afterward. He didn't feel sorry for what he had done. He knew that he had hurt all 3 people and maybe even caused serious harm to the one with the weapon. To him, it was clear. When you act that way, you should expect serious consequences. They were caught, and now they faced those consequences. His main worry was for Joe, and also for Kate. After a few minutes, he turned around. "I assume you all took care of the others?" Donna chuckled, and Sal replied, "Yeah, they might think they're tough, but not around here. They were also very high, so they were easy to handle. If the bouncers hadn't stepped in, we would have taken care of them even more right there." "Chris, Sal sent the loudmouth to the hospital to fix his teeth, and Joey kicked the other one in the face. He'll need surgery, too. The one you grabbed just sat there crying. Even when the police put him in handcuffs, he complained about his shoulder." "What did you do to him?" Joey asked. "I've never seen that before." "It was risky. I could have really hurt him, so let's leave it at that. How is Kate?" Joe was almost unresponsive. She kept saying no and stop, but she was very close to being hurt badly. Joey added, "The first EMT who checked on Kate thought she might have had an overdose, so she called the hospital to get ready. Kate was almost unresponsive too, like you saw." The driver pulled into the hospital, and that ended their talk. They waited in the emergency room until a nurse came to ask if any family members were there with information for the 2 young women. Chris said he had the information for Joe, and Kate's parents were on their way. The nurse took him with her. The Ellisons arrived 8 minutes later, along with the Becks and Alexanders. Donna told the Ellisons the hospital needed personal and insurance information for Kate, and they went to the nurses' station. "What in the world happened?" Deborah asked as they gathered around Donna, Sal, and Joey. "We don't know much, Mom. As you know, we went to the dance club to find Joe." It was busy, but Chris found an empty table for us just in time. "By the way, this is Sal, and this is Joey. We haven't shared last names yet. Sal, Joey, these are my parents, Deborah and Dan Alexander, and our friends, Sandy and Trey Beck." We started walking toward where Joe and Kate were sitting. Chris looked angry, and that helped us move through the crowd easily. When we got there, Joe was gone, and 2 guys were bothering Kate while a 3rd guy watched them. She seemed out of it, completely unaware with the guys getting too close. Chris quickly took action and confronted the guy, and suddenly the guy was talking. He let us out, telling Sal and Joey to handle the other 2. They jumped in as soon as they stood up, ready to defend themselves. Soon, the police and emergency workers arrived. They placed Kate on a stretcher and took her to an ambulance. When we went outside, we found Chris, who told us Joe was passed out and not in a good situation when he arrived. He must have fought back too, because I overheard 2 cops saying the 3 guys who caused trouble were hurt badly. When Donna paused, the boys introduced themselves as Salvatore, Sal, Rossi, and Joseph, Joey Esposito, and shared more about what happened. Chris came back soon and told us that both girls were getting fluids, vitamins, and medication through an IV. The medication was to help them from the effects of too much Rohypnol. The anger in his eyes and voice was clear, and his mother asked what he wasn't saying. The doctor told me that they took too much Rohypnol, and that they also had MDMA and alcohol in their systems. He said it was a dangerous mix that could have killed them and still might. When the Ellisons get here, we need to talk about how they ended up with those older men. For the next 10 minutes, we tried to help Chris calm down. The Becks reassured him that the Ellisons were good parents who wouldn't allow their children to be with anyone unsafe. Mr. Ellison looked angry, and Mrs. Ellison was in tears. Chris walked right up to them and asked, "Who were Joe and Kate with when they left your house?" Mrs. Ellison cried even louder. "Mr. Ellison met Chris's gaze and said, "With Kate's cousin Thomas. He's in the hospital too. Someone hurt him badly. It's likely the same people who drugged the girls." "Show me a picture of him," Chris demanded. Mr. Ellison hesitated, but the anger in Chris's voice and clenched fists made him agree. "Show him Thomas's picture, Sherry. He's her nephew. her brother's son. He's not a bad kid. I'm sure he got hurt trying to protect them. His words sounded like a mix of hope and worry. Ellison took his phone out of his bag and showed Chris a photo of the three of them from just before they went dancing. Chris's face turned bright red. He looked at Ellison and said, "I pulled that guy out of the van and pushed him when he tried to get back in. He wasn't there to help Jo. He was holding her down while she shouted for help." He got angry and said, "If he survives and Jo doesn't, I swear I'll make him pay. They gave both girls drugs mixed with alcohol that were dangerous and could have harmed them. If they hadn't received help when they did, this could have ended very badly. So don't tell me he was trying to protect them." Ellison stepped back, trying to avoid Chris, while Chris's father attempted to calm him down. Chris shook his dad off, causing Ellison to fall back into a chair. Chris yelled, "You almost got them both killed! If we hadn't arrived when we did, they would be in serious trouble!" Mrs. Ellison had gone from quietly crying to shouting, which quickly brought over security. One guard tried to hold Chris back, but Chris pushed him away. Another guard stopped and warned them to help calm Chris down, or he might have to use a stun device. Chris turned, his eyes blazing, and the guard wisely stepped back. Donna got in front of Chris and begged him to relax, and it worked. He blinked and slowly calmed down. Ellison was still in the chair, but now had his head in his hands, crying. "I knew something was wrong when I saw those tattoos. I should have stopped it. I almost lost my daughter." Mrs. Ellison was led to a chair next to her husband, repeating, "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." Chris turned away from them and walked out the door into the cold. Sal, Joey, and Donna quickly followed him, while the Becks and Alexanders stood together in shock. The guards approached, and one commented, "We've seen many upset husbands, but that one takes the cake. Did they really put his wife in danger?" He pointed at the Ellisons, who were holding each other and crying. Dan Alexander took a deep breath and replied, "Not intentionally. They let the girls leave with a cousin who met some bad people at the dance club. They gave the girls drugs that were very harmful. Our son, Chris, cares deeply for Jo, his wife. He's all she has, and he is very serious about looking after her. But we have never seen him this angry before, so..." Trey Beck spoke up. "Chris works for me, and everyone really likes him, even his team. He's an engineer, usually calm and collected. I can't believe this is happening." "He might be calm, but I wouldn't want to cross him or his wife or whoever she is. The police said he seriously hurt the three men who attacked his wife, and the doctor mentioned it's not looking good for them. One has a broken jaw, another is in surgery for serious injuries, and the third has a serious neck injury." They began to step away, but one officer turned back and said, "We're going to act like this never happened. We have families too, and we understand. Honestly, I can't say I wouldn't have reacted the same way, but you might want to consider finding some help to manage his anger. He is really intense." It was the longest night of Chris's life, while the Ellisons sat across the room from him. They knew Chris was upset with them, and they couldn't deny that they blamed themselves. A mother's job is to care for her family. She felt she had failed. A father's role is to protect his family. He felt he had failed too. The other parents in the room were sympathetic, but it was clear they also held the Ellisons partly responsible. She shed tears, and he offered her comfort, while everyone silently watched the very serious Chris. The anger seemed to have faded, but his cold stare and silence were just as frightening. Everyone hoped for Jo and Kate to pull through, and for Chris if the worst came to pass. At midnight, a doctor finally came out to share the news. Both girls had taken too much Rohypnol along with MDMA, which is also called ecstasy and alcohol. This combination can lead to deep sleep and loss of consciousness, and can be very dangerous for heart rate and breathing. Adding MDMA makes those problems even worse, and can cause heart issues. When Deborah directly asked him, he admitted that such a mix can sometimes be fatal. Chris bluntly asked if the girls were going to survive. The doctor replied that they were working hard to keep their heart rates and blood pressure steady and to prevent any heart complications. "Will there be a moment when we'll know for sure?" Chris asked. The doctor explained that it was a minute-by-minute situation, so he couldn't say when they might start to improve. Chris turned and walked back outside, this time alone. He clearly needed space to think. Mrs. Ellison broke down in tears again, and Mr. Ellison held her close to comfort her. Sandy Beck wanted to know who the medical contact for her nephew was, and she mentioned that her brother was coming from LA and would arrive later. When Chris came back to the waiting room, he told everyone, the Becks, the Alexanders, Sal, and Joey, that they could go home. But everyone firmly disagreed, and Donna gave him a strong look, telling him that was not a good idea. So they all waited through the night and into the early morning. Some dozed off without meaning to, but everyone appeared tired except Chris, who seemed ready to tackle whatever came next. A little after 4 in the morning, Mrs. Ellison's brother arrived. He looked very worried and upset. "How is my son?" he asked his sister. "We don't know. They won't tell us because we aren't his parents. The nurse's station is down that way. You should ask them," she replied. "Did they catch the person responsible for this?" he demanded angrily. Mr. Ellison quickly responded, "Don, let's focus on Donnie's condition first. We can talk about that later." He looked at Chris and understood that his expression said a lot. Chris started to get up from his chair, but his dad and Trey were sitting next to him for a reason. They held onto his arms, and his dad said softly but firmly, "Just relax, son. He's a worried parent who doesn't know everything. Let the police handle it." After taking a few deep breaths, Chris settled back in his chair, and the Ellisons slumped into theirs. When a smiling nurse came into the waiting room at 6:25, it was the first sign of good news since they arrived. "Mr. Beck, Mrs. and Mr. Ellison, Dr. Sykes asked me to tell the families that the girls are stable enough to be moved to rooms. They aren't completely out of danger, but we feel hopeful and believe they are improving." The Ellisons began to cry tears of relief. Sandy, Donna, and Deborah hugged each other, while Sal and Joey gave each other high fives. Trey and Dan put their hands on Chris's shoulders and cheered. Chris remained serious. When Donna ran over to hug him and saw his unchanging expression, she asked why he wasn't happy. "They're not completely out of danger yet. When they are, I'll celebrate, not before." A disappointed Don returned to the waiting room with a police officer. He looked around, saw Chris, and walked toward him. Chris stood up, tense and ready. "Young man, I'm here to sincerely apologize for my earlier mistake. The officer showed me the police report, and it's clear Donnie was at fault. He's always been a bit of a troublemaker, but lately, especially since he left college a year ago, he's gotten into more trouble with the law. Every time I try to guide him or offer help, he pushes back at me. I told my sister that when he said he was coming to stay with them, I hoped being around someone like Kate, who is doing well, would help him change. His brothers didn't want to come with him. They didn't believe him when he said he was leaving his bad friends behind and didn't want to take the risk. I feel like I should have told my sister everything about him before he went there. I truly regret how he treated your wife and his cousin, and I'm sorry for their pain. I hope one day you can forgive me." Chris looked directly at him during the apology and said calmly, "Looking back, I wish I had stopped her from coming without me. I'm sorry for what happened to your son. It wasn't meant to hurt him. He seemed dangerous, and I thought pulling him from the van would help. When he tried to get back inside just moments after another person threatened me, I didn't have many options left. I had to act quickly to protect myself. If he had stayed outside, I wouldn't have done anything more. Will he be okay? They say he will survive, but he will need several surgeries. The police are confident they have strong evidence against him, and they expect the district attorney to pursue charges. My lawyer is coming here to help him work out a deal if he tells the truth about what happened. The lawyer is not trying to get him off the hook. He did what he did, and now he has to face the results of his actions, as I warned him before. The lawyer's purpose is to make sure he gets the medical and mental help he needs before the trial and after he serves time. I hope one day he can turn his life around and return to our family as the person we hoped he would be." Chris nodded and said, "I don't think you need to apologize to me. I understand you feel responsible, but he's an adult. He made his own choices. You and Kate's parents can reflect on what could have been done, but that won't change the pain the girls have already gone through. Maybe the best we can do now is pray for all three of them." The Ellisons started crying again, but this time it was a relief seeing Chris accept the apology and try to help. A little while later, the good news arrived when the nurse came back and said that Joe's husband and Kate's parents could visit the girls in their new rooms. Donna quickly asked if she, Joe's sister-in-law, could come in too. The nurse smiled and replied, "Let's just keep it to her husband for now, maybe later." In the end, no one lost their life, but 5 out of the 6 involved had serious injuries that needed surgery. The 6th person suffered from long-lasting nerve pain at the base of his neck. Joe was awake when Chris came into the room. Though she looked sleepy and a bit lost, she recognized him and called his name, reaching out with her arms. An IV line hung from her, and her excitement made the heart rate alarm beep. The nurse just smiled and turned it off when she saw Joe's happy reaction. Chris leaned closer and gently hugged her. He asked softly, "How are you feeling?" She answered, "Much better now that I see you. What are you doing here?" The nurse had told Chris that Joe might not remember much about the previous night because of the medicine she received. He explained, "It's a longer story. Let's just say I came to see you. I wasn't following you. I came with the Becks, my parents, and Donna. They are all eager to see you, especially Donna." He continued, "We spent the night in the ER waiting area, but they moved us here when you got transferred. You can let us know when you're ready to see others and who you want to see first. We don't want to tire you out." Joe asked if he could stay, and he replied that he hadn't asked but planned to stay until someone told him to leave. She smiled and hugged him tighter. A little later, she invited him to sit on her bed, and she wanted to hear the longer story. He said he would tell her when the doctor allowed it, then changed the topic to the Ellisons, their plane, and skiing. Joe sometimes struggled to find the right words, which frustrated her. But as she talked about the flight, the Ellisons' home, and how it felt to learn and enjoy skiing, Chris noticed she became more expressive and lively. He thought that was a good sign, and encouraged her to keep sharing. Soon, nurses came to take Joe for some tests, saying she would be back in about an hour, and they suggested Chris grab breakfast during that time. He went back to the waiting area, gathered everyone, and told them he would share what he knew if they joined him for breakfast in the hospital cafeteria. They happily agreed, and he entertained them with Joe's stories over a good meal. Then the Ellisons and Joe's brother Don came in. They saw the larger group and quickly moved to another table across the room. Chris stood up and walked over to them, and everyone at his table held their breath until they heard him ask about Kate with concern in his voice. The relief on the Ellisons' faces was clear as they took turns sharing the good news about Kate. He then turned to Don Standard and asked about his son. Don shrugged and said his son was sleeping a lot, but the doctor mentioned that was normal and a good sign. Chris thanked him for the update and started to walk away. "Chris, how is Joe?" Mrs. Ellison asked. He shared a quick update on what he knew, thanked them for asking, and went back to his group. The Ellisons and Don talked, glancing at Chris from time to time. Finally, the nurse came back with a smile. "Mrs. Alexander is in her room. 2 of you can visit at a time, but try not to tire her out. She is still weak." Before Chris could say anything, his sister and mother rushed past the nurse towards Joe's room. Donna smiled and winked over her shoulder. "We won't be long," she promised. They didn't return for about 30 minutes. While they were gone, Chris, his dad, and Trey walked to the cafeteria for more coffee and discussed Chris's chances in Boulder. Dad supported the idea completely, and Trey was excited for him, but Chris seemed less sure. Donna came right to Chris and sat in his lap. "I'm sorry, big brother. You know how I love to talk to my best friend? We kinda lost track of time. Can you forgive me?" He kissed her cheek and asked her to let him up. After she kissed his forehead, he stood up with her in his arms and placed her in a chair. Mom then hugged him, said she was sorry too, and laughed as he shook his head, pulled away, and hurried down the hall. "I must have really been out of it last night. I don't remember anything that happened to me, even getting married. You'd think I'd remember that," Joe said with a smile. Chris looked a bit uneasy. "They needed a relative to give personal and insurance information for your admission and treatment. Since you're on my insurance?" "Speaking of insurance, when did I get that, and why didn't I know?" she asked, her brow furrowing but her eyes bright. "You were added to my health insurance when I put you on my auto insurance," Chris explained. "I didn't mention it then because you were so set against accepting anything else from me. If you check the wallet you carry in your purse, you'll find the card." "Come here. I owe you a hug," she said. After a warm hug, she let go and said, "So, Sir Galahad, tell me more about your latest adventure. Donna and Deborah told me what they know, but they don't know what happened in the van." Joe, how about I give you a quick summary? I opened the sliding door to the van, found 3 men near you, and worked to get them under control. No way there's more to it than that. Tell me everything. He sighed. That's about it, except that you were in a difficult situation, and one of them was trying to take advantage of you. You were hardly aware, but you were still telling them to stop. So you just convinced them to stop? Come on, Chris. I've seen how you handle things, and I heard about the 3 men. I want all the details. Sighing, I focused on Joe's eyes. I know Donna mentioned we went to the dance club because a couple who were with us knew where you and Kate were. We met 2 boys around your age who had noticed where you were sitting. They warned us that the guys you were with could cause trouble. We looked for your table, but you were gone, and there were 4 empty chairs with drinks still on them. Kate was feeling unwell, but 2 of them were bothering her anyway. I convinced the 3rd guy to tell us where you were. Joey and Sal said they had some skills in karate, so I let them handle the troublemakers and went to find the van. I found it, opened the door, and saw someone in a troubling position over you. I pulled him out by his hair and jumped inside to push him away from you. I knocked him out, but then the bigger guy in the back reached for something. I hit him in the back of the head before he could aim at me. The police arrived, and I signaled them. They called for help, and you were taken here. Is that enough information? Because that's all I'm sharing. She watched him for a few moments. You're holding something back, but I'll figure it out later, so I'll drop it for now. You look really worn out. When was the last time you slept? Chris shrugged. I slept Monday night like everyone else. We flew up here yesterday, moved into the Beck's big vacation house, and went out to eat. You know the rest. So how long will they keep you here? Just then, Joe's doctor walked in to answer the question. I can help with that, he said. As soon as the blood and urine tests show the drugs are out of her system, and if her blood pressure and heart rate stay normal, we'll let her go provided she has someone to look after her for the next day. We'll give you an oxygen monitor and heart rate monitor to take with you, Joe. If the oxygen level drops too low or the heart rate goes too high, you need to return directly to the hospital. I don't want to alarm you, but the mix you were given can be very harmful, which thankfully it wasn't this time, but it can also have lasting effects. I'll need the name and contact details for your regular doctor to send them your records. Your doctor will want to see you soon to check for any issues caused by the drugs. Joe urged Chris and the others to go back to the Becks and get some rest. She promised to call if the tests came back okay so they could bring her clothes and take her home. Knowing he was really tired but still needing to give a statement to the police and wanting to be ready when Joe got back, Chris agreed to go back to the house with the others. He arrived at the house, but collapsed on the bed and fell asleep as soon as he got to his room. He woke up almost 6 hours later, took a quick shower, put on clean jeans, and hurried downstairs. Joe was sitting at the kitchen table with Donna, his mom, his dad, and Sandy and Trey Beck. Chris frowned as he walked toward the kitchen. Why didn't you wake me up when they brought her home? He asked suddenly. Don't use that tone with me, young man. You aren't the only one who cares about Joe, and you aren't the only one who can help her, Deborah replied. Also, you were sound asleep and we all agreed you needed the rest. Besides, she hasn't been here long. She was just starting to tell us about the fun she had with the Ellisons before Donnie showed up. Find a chair and join us. Trey brought a chair from the other side and placed it between Joe and Deborah, who moved over a little. Joe scooted her chair as close as she could and said, I was hoping to sit in your lap, Sir Galahad, but I guess this will do. The new nickname caused chuckles and smiles, but Chris just hugged her and said, So tell us what you've been up to. Hanging out with the tattooed guys every night? She pinched his leg playfully and said, Kate and her parents were wonderful. They treated me like part of the family as soon as we arrived. They gave me winter clothes to wear, taught me to ski, and wouldn't let me pay for anything. Not even the amazing meals we had each night at this great restaurant they love. Sandy Beck interrupted. That's where we'd be right now, if only. Anyway, we changed our plans to tomorrow at 8, so you'll find out what she means then. Okay, Joe, please continue. Kate's cousin Donnie showed up Monday night but didn't stay long. He said his brothers were coming with him, but they got sick and stayed home. Then he mentioned he was meeting some friends who had come up from L.A. He didn't show up again until the next morning, and he didn't go skiing until we went at 2 that afternoon. Mrs. Ellison offered to take us out to eat again, but Donnie wanted to take us dancing, so we decided to grab something in town before we went to the club. I didn't like the way he looked at me when we were introduced, but Kate told me they had always been close, so I didn't worry too much. We grabbed a burger and then waited outside the club for Donnie's friends. Kate and I were both a bit nervous after we saw them, but they were polite and nice, so we relaxed. After all, we were going to be in a busy dance club. What could happen? Ha! Anyway, one of them arrived early and secured a big table so we could all sit together. I was drinking 7-Up and Kate had some kind of wine cooler. She encouraged me to try it and ordered one for me. Then the music started and LaMarcus took my hand shouting, "Let's dance!" Donnie took Kate's hand and we all joined together, putting our hands in the air and dancing to the song. After a few upbeat songs, we returned to our table to find wine coolers waiting for us. We were thirsty from dancing, so we drank them quickly. I should have been cautious, but Kate said they weren't very strong, so I thought they were like the wine spritzers Sandy let me taste. When I started feeling a bit dizzy later, I thought maybe they were stronger than I realized and decided to stop drinking. Then a classic rock song came on that everyone loved, so all 6 guys danced with Kate and me. It was enjoyable, and I began to feel really happy and excited. We continued dancing to a few more songs until a slow song played and I returned to the table. Fast dancing was fun, but I wasn't comfortable slow dancing with the guys. Luke went to get us more drinks, but another classic song came on, so we all went back to the dance floor. When we came back, new drinks were waiting for us. I hardly took a sip, but I felt myself getting more and more relaxed. I know we danced a lot after that, but I started feeling strange, like the music was vibrating inside me. My skin felt overly sensitive, and I had trouble thinking clearly, so they called us lightweights and helped Kate and me back to the table. They insisted we sit down and finish our drinks to cool off. I knew I probably shouldn't, but I did and couldn't recall why. I vaguely remember Luke saying something in my ear, but then I felt unwell, and they took me outside for fresh air or something. After that, I don't remember much, but it felt like I was dreaming. In that dream, I felt cold and uncomfortable, and there were people around me, and I was telling them to stop. The next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital. Jo had been calm while telling her story, though Chris noticed she was trembling slightly against his leg, and he understood better. After receiving kind words for what she'd gone through, especially after the recent situation with her mother and stepfamily, Jo thanked everyone and asked the Becks if she could stay with them for the rest of the trip. They said they wouldn't hear of it any other way, and she asked if someone could take her to the Ellisons to collect her clothes and luggage. Chris offered to help, and the Becks suggested they take their car so everyone could come along. Chris understood they were unsure about him, but he knew he was only there to pick up Jo's things, not to make things worse. Sandy called Stephanie Ellison, who said Kate was home and eager to see Jo. She invited everyone over for a drink and a chance to settle things down after all that happened at the hospital. Sandy agreed and then told the group what she had arranged. She looked at Chris, who kept a calm face and shrugged, saying, "We're your guests, so it's up to you." She knew that didn't sound very supportive and hoped her attempt to bring everyone together wouldn't lead to more problems. The Ellisons' chalet was as lovely as the Becks, sitting on the side of a mountain with a stunning view. The ski lifts were just downhill, accessible via a nice path. Kate ran outside, hugged Jo tightly and cried, saying sorry for everything that had happened. Chris stood back and let the girls comfort each other, as did everyone else. After a bit, Kate's mother welcomed them inside. Everyone hugged her and her husband as they entered. Chris shook their hands warmly and smiled. After a few moments, Kate brought Jo back inside and requested everyone's attention. "I have something important to say and need to apologize for a mistake that almost led to serious trouble. When Donnie invited us to go dancing, I was thrilled. Even though he is a few years older, we used to be close, but he changed recently. He started smoking, got tattoos, and his brothers said he was hanging out with some bad company. He wasn't drinking or using drugs as far as I could tell when we skied together Tuesday afternoon, so I don't think he had any problems then. Anyway, my parents wanted us to go with them, but I convinced them to let us go to the dance with Donnie. I promised to avoid drinking too much and call for a ride if he caused any issues. The trip to the dance club in his new van was great, and we were having fun waiting for some friends he mentioned. They turned out to be more than just a couple of people. They were polite and seemed nice, so we agreed to go inside with them. As soon as they showed up, Donnie changed, and not for the better. I think something was added to our first drinks, and I'm sure our second and third drinks had something too. I don't drink often, but those drinks made me feel extremely dizzy quite fast. Jo doesn't drink, and she ended up feeling even worse with just 2 cooler drinks and a soda. I remember being too tipsy to dance, so we returned to our table, and I don't recall much after that. Chris, I know you blame my parents for letting us go with those older men, but honestly, I just wanted to be close to my cousin again. We really didn't expect to meet those men, and you know Jo and I aren't the type to hang out with people like that. Chris looked at her, then at her parents, and then back at her. I was wrong to accuse them the way I did, and I'm sorry for how I acted that night. Mr. Ellison stepped forward and shook his head. No, Chris, you don't need to apologize for what happened. First, you were right. If we were going to let the girls go with Donnie, especially after his dad warned us about him, we should have gone with them or at least checked on them. Second, both girls were in serious trouble, and you had just gone through a tough situation when they were in danger. I foolishly assumed that Donnie was trying to help. When we showed you his picture and you identified him as someone involved, Stephanie and I were shocked and heartbroken. Since then, we've thought about how you must have felt, and we understand why you were so upset. We want to apologize for our harsh words and actions and hope that you'll be there if our daughter ever needs help again. You saved her just like you saved Jo, and we are incredibly grateful for that. If you can forgive us, we'd like to do anything we can to make it up to you, Jo, and your family. Sir, you don't owe me anything, but if you can forgive my actions, it would mean a lot to me. Mrs. Ellison, I'm really sorry for hurting you like I did. Mr. Ellison, I appreciate that you didn't hit me when I lost my temper. You had every right to do so. Mrs. Ellison stepped toward him with her arms open and asked for a hug. He agreed, and she smiled up at him. Thank you, Chris, for rescuing our girls from our mistake. Mr. Ellison stood just behind her, smiled, and joked. I have a feeling I'd be in the hospital if I had hit you, but I appreciate your words. Thank you for bringing our daughter back to us. We're happy to trust her with you any time. Just knowing you're in Fort Worth makes us feel better about her going to TCU. Chris felt a bit shy about being called a hero, but he was glad to leave the bad feelings behind. He knew that Kate's intentions were innocent, so he held out his arm toward her. She ran to him and joined her mom in giving him a warm hug and thanking him. After they finished, Stephanie turned to Deborah and said, I don't know what you feed him, but he's as strong as a very tough rock. Oh my goodness! She waved her hand in front of her face, trying to feel cooler, and all the women laughed with her. You should dance with him, Stephanie. He moves effortlessly on the dance floor. I feel so light when he takes charge. I would love to try that, and I want to treat all of you to dinner at our favorite restaurant, and then a night of dancing at a quieter club tomorrow. It's on us. Can you all make it? Jo and Kate whispered and smiled. Then Kate said, We'll go, but only if one of those charming guys will watch our drinks while we dance. Donna put her hands on her hips and said, I'll only come if you invite Joey and Sal, the 2 friends from Tuesday night who helped Kate. Joey and Sal felt shy about being called heroes, but they happily accepted friendly kisses and firm handshakes from the women and men. They shared warm hugs with Chris and patted each other on the back, calling each other tough guys. Everyone enjoyed the moment and knew it was true. The next morning, they skied for an hour and a half, had lunch, rested, and then went for another short ski run, being careful not to push Jo and Kate too hard. That night, after a lovely dinner, Chris danced with Stephanie and the other ladies. They mostly played ballroom music, so Joey and Sal needed some help learning to dance, but they were quick learners. Chris noticed Trey talking to the band leader during a break, but he didn't think much of it. The band sounded great, and he wanted to tell them that soon. When Trey returned, he whispered something to the 6 parents, who all looked at Chris. What was going on? Now, we are going to play a special request, and it's for 2 fantastic dancers. Jo and Chris, will you please join us on the dance floor? Feel free to join them if you want, but trust me, you won't want to miss this show. As Jo and Chris stepped onto the empty dance floor, the band started playing La Comparsita, one of the best tango songs ever. Jo smiled at Chris. Ready to impress them? Chris smiled back. They are in for a treat. especially with that outfit you're wearing." She blushed and joked, "Knowing Kate, she's probably streaming this live for everyone to see when we get back to the table." They moved on to the dance floor perfectly in sync with the music and put on an exciting performance. They received a standing ovation and cheers for an encore. The band leader raised his hands and Chris asked Joe what they should do next, shouting, "Cha-cha!" That brought more cheers, and they heard Trey yell, "Jitterbug!" to the band leader. They danced for a while, then invited others to join them. Soon the dance floor was full and as lively as the other dance hall had been. Chris and Joe slipped back to their table to grab their drinks. Dan, who was in charge of overseeing the drinks, cheerfully said to them, "You two are a great pair on the dance floor. That was a lovely mix of rhythm and fun, and I mean that in a good way." Everyone laughed, raised their glasses in a toast, and watched the others enjoy dancing. No one said anything when Joe went upstairs with Chris, but they shared smiles. Meanwhile, the women were busy preparing breakfast and asked the men to wait in another room until it was ready. Chris, Trey, and Dan quietly enjoyed their coffee while looking at the beautiful mountain view through the big window. Dan then asked Chris quietly, "How old am I, son?" Chris frowned slightly and responded, "You're 51, Dad. Is your memory not as sharp as it used to be?" Dan nodded, took another sip, and asked, "How old is your mom?" Chris replied, "She turned 44 on November 1st, Dad. Do you need a reminder or some puzzles to help you out?" Ignoring him, Dan turned to Trey. "So, Trey, how much older am I than Deborah?" With a serious look, Trey answered, "About 7 years, Dan. Did you know I'm 6 years older than Sandy? Sure, she looks younger, but most people don't realize or they think she's my younger partner." They both took sips of their coffee, looking innocent, but Chris just thought for a moment. "Okay, I understand, but she's only 18. Your mom was 19 when we got married, Chris. Trey? Sandy was 20, just barely." They turned back to Chris. "Well, oh no, you're spoiling my big plan." They all smiled and continued sipping their coffee in silence. After a delicious breakfast, they agreed to stay another day to make up for the time lost. Kate and Joe's health had stabilized, and it had been 24 hours since their release. They put on their ski gear and went over to the Ellisons to join them for a morning run. Kate, Donna, and Joe skied together on the easier slopes, while Sandy, Stephanie, and Deborah did the same. Sal and Joey were good skiers but stayed close to Donna and Kate. Dan and Trey mostly skied on the more challenging trails but did some easier runs with the women. Ed Ellison joined Chris on the toughest slopes. Ed was a more refined skier, while Chris was stronger and more athletic, and they helped each other out. At the scheduled time, everyone gathered at the bottom of the mountain, waiting for Ed and Chris to come down from the top, where the hardest trails were. They thought the two men would come down the easier trail to their right, not directly from the steep mountain in front of them. And then, "Oh my gosh, Mom! Is that Dad and Chris? Are they out of their minds?" Joe turned pale, Deborah covered her mouth in shock, and Donna squealed with excitement. Joey and Sal looked on with envy, while Trey told Dan, "I'm going to make him work in a cast." A few moments later, they jumped off a cliff, falling almost straight down before landing and gliding toward the trees far below. Ed led the way at first, but Chris whizzed past him, skillfully navigating through the soft snow at the cliff's base. They skied through the trees, stopping in a puff of snow near the others, leaving their poles dangling, and high-fived each other. "That was awesome!" Ed shouted. "I've always wanted to try that. Thanks for encouraging me." Chris was laughing and celebrating with Ed when a girl approached him, looking very upset. "You can't ever do something like that again, Christian," she said firmly. "I thought you might hurt yourself." Stephanie walked over to Ed, holding her ski pole like it was a bat. She pretended to scold him for his reckless behavior. Donna jumped up and kissed Chris's cheek. "That was amazing, big bro. Kate and I recorded the whole thing. We'll watch it on the big screen TV at home." Joey and Sal came over, cheering and raising their hands for high fives. Dan and Trey shook their heads playfully but gave the two men thumbs up and winks. Deborah joined Joe and added her own worried comments, pointing at her smiling son. He took a big step forward, wrapped his arms around them, and reassured them, "I'm fine. What's all the fuss? It's a marked trail. People ski here all the time." "Is that so?" asked Mom. "Then why haven't I seen anyone on it, and why was the snow untouched?" Later that afternoon, they headed down the mountain to Salt Lake City to shop and eat at a popular seafood restaurant that served fresh Pacific oysters, scallops, salmon, and snow crab legs. They arrived well before dinner, so they rode the free trolleys from one shop to another. The younger ones took the trolley up to the University of Utah campus, while the adults enjoyed a pre-dinner drink. They visited the Rice Eccles Stadium, home to the Utah UTE's football team and a past host of the Winter Olympics. They looked around a bit. It was nice, but Chris felt the Carter would be even better when finished. They rode the trolley back to the nearest stop to the restaurant, introduced themselves, and confirmed their reserved table. The adults arrived a little later, ready to enjoy oysters on the half-shell. Chris and Joe, coming from the south, were surprised to learn about the many types and sizes of oysters, which were not available back home. Their meals were delicious, and they enjoyed the company even more. The fun they had on Friday seemed unlikely after the tough days of Tuesday and Wednesday, but everything felt just right that evening. Somehow, going through tough times had made them close friends with the Ellisons. As the meal came to an end, Chris received a text. He smiled while reading it, but didn't say anything. Later, he went to the restroom with his dad, and they both returned with soft smiles. Joe noticed, but wasn't as curious as Deborah. Once outside at the Suburban, Deborah asked, "So what are you two up to?" "Nothing, dear. Don't worry about us," Dan replied, giving Chris a playful wink. Joe stayed quiet until they were alone in their bedroom. "Was that about the lake place?" "Yes and no. Yes, Tina made an offer for us on the lake property, but no, the real reason for our smiles is that the owners accepted my offer on the Kittler property. The survey crew has been working there all day, and the title company has already checked everything. Tina got them started as soon as she made our offer, and they said it was straightforward. The same family has owned it from the beginning. The paperwork is clear and valid, it has never had any debts, and the taxes have always been paid on time. If everything goes smoothly, we could close as soon as next week." "So Mom doesn't know about this either?" Joe asked, surprised. "No, and neither do my sisters. I want to fix it up first and then invite them down to see it," Chris replied. "No, you should let them see it now before you start fixing it. Then bring them back when you're finished," she insisted. After discussing it, her idea won. Chris went back downstairs and found Trey Beck and his dad having a drink and talking about their trips home tomorrow. "Trey, is there enough room for Mom, Dad, and Donna to fly back with us to Fort Worth?" Beck said that wouldn't be a problem, so Chris turned to his dad. "Can you change your flight from SLC to DFW?" His dad said that wouldn't be an issue, but asked why. "Joe thinks I should show both of you and your wives the property I just bought. Like I mentioned, it needs a lot of work, and she believes I should show it to you both before and after. I was going to surprise everyone later, but I like her idea more." "Would that cause any issues for anyone?" Trey replied, "We're leaving at 9:30 and will land around 12:30 Central Time. We could grab a meal and go take a look before heading home. That way we can take Dan, Deborah, and Donna to DFW for a late afternoon flight and get them home before bed. What do you think, Dan?" "I'm in, but let's check with the others first. They might have plans we don't know about." The two-vehicle caravan arrived at Chris's new property just after 1:20 Saturday afternoon. He and Joe had given them a sneak peek, so the Becks and Alexanders understood what to expect when their car arrived, and Donna was getting the details from Joe in the pickup. Everyone was excited about what Sandy called the little ranch in the middle of Fort Worth. The women worried about the amount of work needed, while the construction workers discussed how to renovate the house, fix the buildings, and tidy up the yard. Bringing in highly skilled construction experts was a smart idea. They offered good advice and alternative plans, and Trey knew every talented worker in the area. Their suggestions and Trey's contacts would help everything happen faster and smoother. Having the ladies there was also a great idea because they shared ideas enthusiastically in every room. Joe took notes, and by the time the Becks took the Alexanders to the airport, options and plans for each room were ready for Chris to think about. They waved as the car drove away and walked back inside side by side. Chris wanted to discuss their ideas again, but Joe needed to use the bathroom first. "Meet me in the kitchen. We can start there," she said as she walked off. When she returned, she was wearing a different outfit. He smiled as she sat on the counter by the sink and leaned forward. Oh, you thought I meant start on the ideas, she said playfully. No, honey, I meant start our project of enjoying each other in every room of the house. He laughed and pulled her closer while sharing a sweet kiss. She pulled him toward her with a smile. He joked, You know this counter is going to be replaced, right? We might have to do it here again later. I know. That's what makes a big renovation exciting. We can enjoy every space before and after. Are you sure your doctor said it's okay to be this active? He asked with a grin after kissing her cheek. Oh, yes. He said I should keep active starting Saturday to help my health, so let's get to work. We have a lot to explore. Ooh, yes, just like that. Her energy was waning, and they could only enjoy a few moments in the kitchen before she had to pause for a meal, a shower, and rest. The food and shower made her feel better, and this time she really tired Chris out. The 11 a.m. church service felt like it began just moments after they fell asleep. As they quickly got dressed and rushed to the Ram, driving fast toward the church, Chris said, I'll call my doctor tomorrow and set up an appointment for you since you don't have a doctor in Fort Worth yet. I'll tell him that you got quite a workout with me from Saturday afternoon until Sunday morning, and even though you had some strong reactions, your heart rate and blood pressure stayed normal for all that exercise. She unbuckled her seatbelt, moved closer to him, buckled in again, and playfully said, This is my favorite thing ever. The doctor won't believe how happy I feel every time you make me feel good. Being with you is way more fun than drinking or using drugs, and I don't even have a hangover, although I am a little tired. By the time they finished their work, all the teams and suppliers had their plans ready. Since the teams had contracts with Beck they needed to keep, and were working on weekends and after hours, everything went smoothly. There were no delays, no teams waiting for others to show up, and all the materials arrived on time. They trusted and relied on each other. The usual reasons that slow down building projects were dealt with, and the only delays came from the weather. Chris worked for Beck Monday to Friday and then went back to the house to work there, often with Joe. Joe was fascinated by how they took out and replaced wiring, breaker boxes, and light fixtures without harming the elegant red oak paneling in the living and dining rooms and the master bedroom. The plumbers managed to use specially designed areas to replace old pipes without damaging the walls and woodwork. The wooden ceilings needed some repair before they could be restored, but they were able to save and fix the beautiful carved and gold-decorated molding around the living and dining room ceilings. The heating and cooling system had been added to the Victorian-style home in the 1970s, using the space between the floors to run ducts and parts of the old dumbwaiter system to install the indoor units. The old systems were taken out, and new energy-efficient ductwork and units were put in. Skilled painters wearing masks stripped away many layers of old paint and stain, revealing the beautiful red oak underneath. After that, they applied oil and sealant to protect it. The foundation was strong, but Chris wanted to make it even more stable, so he had extra support added. Then he let the team work on the hardwood floors. Though the house looked like a Victorian home from the outside, it had larger rooms than usual for that style and came with spacious closets. The closets, bathrooms, and kitchen were updated to be more modern, while still keeping the house's original charm. Each room was also fitted with plenty of electrical outlets. Chris found replacement chandeliers through the internet and social media. With their help, he acquired beautiful chandeliers that perfectly matched the house. The final touches on the house, including outside repairs and painting, were completed just before Memorial Day. This allowed Chris a month to move in and get settled before he had to leave for a year. Joe finished her exams in early May, and on May 10th, her parents and both sisters came down to help her shop for curtains, rugs, and furniture. The master bedroom was the first room completed, and Chris, with help, furnished it with his chosen items. Everything in that room was well used before the guests arrived. Chris gave his girlfriend, mother, and sisters a generous budget for furniture. Deborah also contributed to make sure the grand old lady, as she loved to call the house, had everything needed to be a beautiful place. The Alexanders stayed for 10 days to help with various projects, including arranging the furniture perfectly. This often took several attempts to get it just right. On Saturday, Chris invited his dad to go fishing at a nearby lake, so they spent most of the day there while the women hung drapes and curtains. They returned without any fish to find a note saying the women had gone to buy new rods for the window coverings and would bring pizza for dinner. The Alexanders stayed until all the window coverings and furniture were set up, which took 2 more days. Chris and his dad stayed outside, only going inside when something needed to be adjusted. They spent time in the barn working on old vehicles that turned out to be in better shape than they expected. In fact, the tractor started right up once they put in fresh diesel and changed the battery, so they connected it to the shredder to give it a try. The front loader and shredder were both working well, but the blades needed to be sharpened. Having the tractor and tools available would really help with cleaning up the grounds and keeping them nice. The Alexanders shared warm hugs and sweet goodbyes as they packed their Class A motorhome and set off east. Chris was starting to think his sisters might actually attend college next year, and Joe was sure of it. Joe was back in summer school, while Chris put in long hours at the stadium. They arranged the work crews to make the most of the extended daylight and mild spring weather. From June to September, the heat would be tough, so they planned shifts to get as much done as possible each day. They were ahead of plan and saving money, but Chris needed to leave for grad school on July 1st. He wanted to finish as much work as he could before handing it over to his replacement. Chris was not a fan of his trainee, Robert. Robert could do the job, but his overconfidence annoyed Chris, the foreman, and the other workers. However, since Robert was chosen by Trey Beck, Chris decided to keep quiet and do his work. That was until the Becks held a catered Memorial Day picnic at an event center by Lake Worth for all the workers and their families. Joe had done a great job supporting Chris throughout the renovation. She kept her 4.0 GPA, but skipped out on parties to help him with the house. She had a knack for design, knowing instinctively what would look good together. She studied restored houses online to ensure their choices matched perfectly. The Memorial Day picnic was the first time Joe and Chris could enjoy a social event together in ages, and she was thrilled. Everything she wore, from her swimsuit cover-up to her sundress, was suitable for the gathering. As usual, the challenge was how great she looked in all her outfits. Robert noticed her right away when she arrived with Chris. While the workers didn't care for him, the women in the office thought he was attractive. He smiled and asked one of them, who was almost fawning over him, if she knew whether Joe was Chris's wife. The woman replied that she didn't know much, just that Chris met her in Arkansas, and that she was thought to be very close to him. Robert shrugged and seemed to shift his focus to the woman nearby, but he kept watching Joe. He felt a strong desire to get to know her better, and he planned to make his move that night. Unbeknownst to Robert, Chris didn't like him much, especially when it came to Joe. If Robert had known better, he might not have tried so hard to impress Joe while she was in the swimming pool, and Chris was chatting with some important people, including the owner. At first, Joe was nice to him, but she stepped back when he moved from friendly flirting to more forward behavior. When he didn't stop, she got out of the pool, put on her cover-up, and went to sit with the owner's wife. Robert then realized he needed to think differently about Joe and change his approach. He got out of the pool, put on a t-shirt and sandals, grabbed a beer, and wandered around until he found Sandy Beck and Joe sitting on chairs. He asked if he could join them, and Mrs. Beck welcomed him. She introduced herself and Joe and started asking him questions. He was happy to share about himself, excitedly talking about his achievements as a high school and college athlete, his academic success, and his work at a smaller company. He hinted at his charm when Sandy asked about his relationship status. Smiling at Joe, he said, "No, I'm not married at the moment. I believe some men are meant to bring joy to women, and that's who I am." Sandy then asked him to grab Joe a cold drink and herself a wine cooler. He eagerly agreed, seeing it as a chance to show off his fit physique, and he jogged off to fetch their drinks. He thought this would be easier than expected. Joe seemed to enjoy listening to him. Once he was out of earshot, Sandy said, "He really thinks a lot of himself, doesn't he?" "If you mean he's a bit full of nonsense, then yes, I completely agree," Joe replied, and she told Sandy about how he acted in the pool. Sandy laughed and said, "Someone should probably let him know Chris doesn't like it when guys flirt with you, but it could make the party more interesting. From what I hear, he's not the favorite among the guys, so if Chris steps in, it might just add to the story." Joe didn't like the idea of Chris getting into a fight with Robert, who was strong and had a sports background. What if Chris got hurt? As soon as Robert returned with the drinks, Jo excused herself and walked straight over to Chris, giving him a warm greeting. Sandy saw Robert's surprised look and quietly laughed to herself. She didn't really want to fight, but watching Robert get put in his place would be entertaining. Trey told Sandy that he was the spoiled son of a fraternity brother looking for a fresh start away from California, so he was hired on a trial basis. Sandy doubted that the trial would work out. Trey had strong feelings about people who got involved with others who were married, and office gossip suggested that was Robert's main focus. Jo convinced Chris to go swimming, and they played around in the water like close friends do. After that, they changed into shorts and t-shirts to join some workers and their spouses for horseshoes and cornhole. They lost more games than they won, but they enjoyed a lively game of volleyball with another group and performed better in the sand. Robert kept trying to impress Sandy until she grew tired of him and returned to her husband, Trey. Not welcome among the construction workers, Trey wandered back to the office staff where he upset the husbands of the women he flirted with openly. He quickly became unwelcome but found a couple of plain single women who seemed open to his flirtations, so he moved on to them. Then he noticed Jo walking toward the restroom with a dress in her hand. He excused himself from the women by saying he wanted to clean up and changed into shorts before following Jo. The men's and women's restrooms were next to each other, and he waited for Jo to come out in her nice sundress. When she did, he approached her along the wall. She told him she wasn't interested and tried to walk past. He blocked her path by placing his hand against the wall and putting his other hand gently on her waist. He told her he knew she was interested in him and wanted to be closer. Jo used a trick she learned before and aimed a knee at him. Unfortunately, he moved just enough that she hit his thigh instead. However, it was enough to make him let go, allowing her to run around the side of the building. He shouted in frustration and chased after her, catching her and covering her mouth to keep her quiet, lifting her slightly by the waist. This wasn't his first time facing resistance, so he stepped away from the crowd and set her down, trying to persuade her that she wanted him just like he wanted her. Jo relaxed a bit, and he took his hand away from her mouth. She quietly asked, "Do you have good insurance? You might need it." He laughed, saying she couldn't possibly hurt someone like him. She laughed too, then pointed toward the corner where Chris was casually leaning against the wall, looking curiously at them. Standing behind him were Jim Bob, Trey, some workers, and a few husbands who were upset with him earlier. "I know you're better looking and smarter than the rest of us, Bobby boy, but I think you realize that's my girl you're holding. She doesn't want to be with you." He shook his head. "I've been known to stand up to someone for less, baby Bobby." Robert let her go, took a step back, and began to blame Jo. Jo turned and lightly kicked him in the leg, but her small sandals hurt her toes more than it hurt him. She hurried over to Chris and said, "Honey, don't waste your time on him. He's not worth it. Let's go back to the party and leave him here with these gentlemen." One of the strong husbands stepped forward, saying, "I call dibs on him." Others quickly lined up behind him. Chris laughed and turned to Jim Bob and Trey, saying, "I can't recommend him for his job. He doesn't care to learn anything and annoys everyone." "Don't worry, Chris," Trey replied. "Jim Bob warned me. I helped him out as a favor to a friend, but we already have someone ready to step in, and Jim Bob will help the new guy start on Tuesday. Now let's walk back to the party and forget about what happens here." Later, Robert was able to leave the parking lot after a group of men helped him to his car. He didn't look so good anymore and wasn't being so cocky as he drove off with a screech of tires and a cloud of dust. "Guess I'll have to send him his severance pay," Trey joked. Once the laughter faded, Chris said, "Thank you for the warning, Sandy." Jo declared, "If you hadn't come, I was going to step on his foot and push him away when he let me go." Trey assured her, "I'm sure you would have taken care of him, but we came to support you just in case." He hugged her tightly, and she smiled. The people around her cheered for her strength, but many jokingly glanced at Chris. He didn't share that he had been watching her carefully even before Sandy spoke. He knew from experience that Jo's looks would always attract all kinds of men, including those who were not good. Because of that, he made sure to keep an eye on her and her situation whenever he was nearby. She saw herself as strong and independent, which he appreciated and encouraged, so he never made it obvious that he was looking out for her. After working hard on the barn all Saturday, Chris pulled Joe into his arms and insisted they take a break. "We have tonight, tomorrow, and Monday to spend time together before I go back to work and you go back to class. I don't want to waste this time in my work clothes and feeling tired. We've reached a good point right now, and honestly, I don't need to be in the barn anytime soon. Let's go out tonight, sleep in, go to church, and take a nice drive on Sunday afternoon. I want to show you the lake property we talked about. Dad and I went out there last Saturday to meet with the owners. They have until June 10th to make a decision, but I'm pretty sure they will accept our offer. I want you to see it. I love all these ideas, but I do have one worry, Chris. Will this new property keep you busy like this house has? Because if it does, you'll never finish the other buildings and the yard." "No, Joe, it won't. Dad and Trey already have a plan for the new project, which is simpler and quicker than fixing up the old one. I won't have much to do besides making plans for the house, dock, boathouse, and beach. Come with me tomorrow, and you'll see what I mean." That night, they met up with John, Mary, Dawn, and Lynn downtown. They walked and danced so much that they almost missed church the next morning. Joe was asked to join the choir again, but she told them she was too busy. They decided to get a picnic from Chicken Express and made the Oranda half-drive to the west side of Lake Whitney. They stopped at the old ranch house where Joe easily talked with the elderly owners. Nanny showed Joe around her home, while Grandpa Ed toured Chris around the barn and yard. They enjoyed homemade coffee cake and coffee together. Nanny and Grandpa Ed took the dirty dishes to the kitchen while their guests finished their drinks. Chris could hear their voices chatting, even while Joe talked about how good the coffee cake was. When they returned, Ed smiled and said they were glad to let Chris and Joe check out the land. Nanny added, "Having you two here made everything easier. After meeting Chris and Dan, we were leaning towards saying yes, but after getting to know Joe better and seeing how wonderful Chris is, we decided you are just the neighbors we want. We will tell our lawyer on Tuesday, and your dad should hear from him a day or two after that. Treat that land like it's already yours. All we ask is that you come by and visit us sometimes. I have 2 sisters and a mom who will probably visit more than you expect, but I promise we'll be good neighbors and friends," Chris assured them. After hugs, they drove away, and Chris called his dad from the site of the planned lake house. "If you get a call from Meridian, Texas next week, answer it, Dad. Joe charmed them so much today that they decided to accept our offer. Why does that not surprise me? We would have finished this much sooner if we had let the women handle things and stayed away ourselves. That's a lesson for next time. And son, after watching them take charge at your new house, I'm going to tell them to get involved. Otherwise, the builders will have a lot of changes to make, and we'll be in trouble." Chris brought a tarp and some blankets. Spread out on the thick grass on the hilltop, they made a cozy place for a playful spirit and her partner. Chris had seen her without clothes before, but he had never seen her lying in the sun on a warm day on soft blankets surrounded by nature. He quickly put on his pants, grabbed his phone, and took many pictures in different poses, saying, "To keep me warm on those cold nights in Colorado." Joe happily joined in, but she started to worry about him being all alone during those chilly evenings. As she laid on her stomach, playfully kicking her feet in the air and glancing at the camera, she wondered how she could convince her school to let her attend a different college for a year and still keep her scholarships when she returned. She thought about that idea now and then while they enjoyed each other's company under the stars, with the moonlight lighting up the scene beautifully. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Infidelity Plus to stay updated with more captivating tales of infidelity and payback. Turn on notifications so you're the first to see our latest content.